The public version of the news of an event is never really what happened. It's never really what happened. It's never really what happened.
We have before us the opportunity to forge for ourselves and for future generations a new world order, a world where the rule of law, not the law of the jungle, governs the conduct of nations. When we are successful, and we will be, we have a real chance at this new world order, an order in which a credible United Nations can use its peacekeeping role to fulfill the promise and vision of the UN's founders.
This is your last chance. After this, there is no turning back. You take the blue pill, the story ends. You wake up in your bed and believe whatever you want to believe. You take the red pill, you stay in Wonderland, and I show you how deep the rabbit hole goes. Remember, all I'm offering is the truth, nothing more. Follow me.
We're going to take another look at September 11th, beginning with those reportedly responsible for the attacks.
I appeared before the Congressional Committee to tell what I knew of activities which might lead to an attempt to set up a fascist dictatorship.
The potential for the disastrous rise of misplaced power exists and will persist.
The very word secrecy is repugnant in a free and open society. And we are, as a people, inherently and historically opposed to secret societies, to secret oaths, and to secret proceedings.
The secret organizations of the world power elite are no longer secret.
It's known as the Bilderberg Group. Could their objective be world domination?
Now we can see a new world coming into view. A world in which there is the very real prospect of a new world order.
Bilderberg is making great progress toward a world government, and only an educated, informed public can stop them in their tracks.
David Rockefeller admits in his own memoirs that he wants to destroy the United States. Right. He's a traitor.
What is a central bank? A central bank is an institution that produces the currency of an entire nation. Based on historical precedent, two specific powers are inherent in central banking practice: the control of interest rates and the control of the money supply, or inflation. The central bank does not simply supply a government's economy with money, it loans it to them at interest. Then, through the use of increasing and decreasing the supply of money, the central bank regulates the value of the currency being issued. It is critical to understand that the entire structure of this system can only produce one thing in the long run: debt. It doesn't take a lot of ingenuity to figure this scam out. For every single dollar produced by the central bank is loaned at interest. That means every single dollar produced is actually the dollar plus a certain percent of debt based on that dollar. And since the central bank has the monopoly over the production of the currency for the entire country, and they loan each dollar out with immediate debt attached to it, where does the money to pay for the debt come from? It can only come from the central bank again, which means the central bank has to perpetually increase its money supply to temporarily cover the outstanding debt created, which in turn, since that new money is loaned out at interest as well, creates even more debt. The end result of this system without fail is slavery, for it is impossible for the government and thus the public to ever come out of the self-generating debt. The founding fathers of this country were well aware of this. By the early 20th century, the U.S. had already implemented and removed a few central banking systems, which were swindled into place by ruthless banking interests. At this time, the dominant families in the banking and business world were the Rockefellers, the Morgans, the Warburgs, the Rothschilds. And in the early 1900s, they sought to push, once again, legislation to create another central bank. However, they knew the government and public were very weary of such an institution, so they needed to create an incident to affect public opinion. So, J.P. Morgan, publicly considered a financial luminary at the time, exploited his mass influence by publishing rumors that a prominent bank in New York was insolvent or bankrupt. Morgan knew this would cause mass hysteria, which would affect other banks as well. And it did. The public, in fear of losing their deposits, immediately began mass withdrawals. Consequently, the banks were forced to call in their loans, causing the recipients to sell their property, and thus a spiral of bankruptcies, repossessions, and turmoil emerged. Putting the pieces together a few years later, Frederick Allen of Life magazine wrote, "The Morgan interests took advantage to precipitate the panic, guiding it shrewdly as it progressed." Unaware of the fraud, the Panic of 1907 led to a congressional investigation headed by Senator Nelson Aldrich, who had intimate ties to the banking cartels and later became part of the Rockefeller family through marriage. The commission, led by Aldrich, recommended a central bank should be implemented so a panic like 1907 could never happen again. This was the spark the international bankers needed to initiate their plan. In 1910, a secret meeting was held at a J.P. Morgan estate on Jekyll Island off the coast of Georgia. It was there that the central banking bill called the Federal Reserve Act was written. This legislation was written by bankers, not lawmakers. This meeting was so secretive, so concealed from government and public knowledge that the 10 or so figures who attended disguised their names when en route to the island. After this bill was constructed, it was then handed over to their political frontman, Senator Nelson Aldrich, to push through Congress. And in 1913, with heavy political sponsorship by the bankers, Woodrow Wilson became president, having already agreed to sign the Federal Reserve Act in exchange for campaign support. And 2 days before Christmas, when most of Congress was at home with their families, the Federal Reserve Act was voted in, and Wilson in turn made it law.
September 11th, 1941. Ground is broken at the Pentagon in Arlington, Virginia, and construction begins. December 7th, 1941. The Imperial Japanese Navy attacks the Pacific Fleet of the United States Navy at Pearl Harbor in Oahu, Hawaii. 2,403 Americans are killed, and an additional 1,178 are wounded. Although Roosevelt received multiple warnings indicating that an attack was imminent, he withholds this information and informs his commanders that negotiations with Japan are underway.
March 13th, 1962. Lyman Lemnitzer, chairman of the Joint Chiefs of Staff, presents a proposal to Secretary of Defense Robert McNamara, named Operation Northwoods. The document proposed staging terrorist attacks in and around Guantanamo Bay to provide a pretext for military intervention in Cuba. The plans included starting rumors about Cuba using clandestine radio, landing friendly Cubans inside the base to stage attacks, starting riots at the main gate, blowing up ammunition inside the base, starting fires, sabotaging aircraft and ships on the base, bombing the base with mortar shells, sinking a ship outside the entrance, staging funerals for mock victims, staging a terror campaign in Miami, Florida, and Washington, D.C., and finally, destroying a drone aircraft over Cuban waters. The passengers, federal agents in reality, would allegedly be college students on vacation. A plane at Eglin Air Force Base would be painted and numbered as a duplicate of a registered civil aircraft belonging to a CIA front in Miami. The duplicate would be substituted for the real plane and loaded with the passengers. The real plane would be converted into a drone. The two planes would rendezvous south of Florida. The passenger-laden plane would land at Eglin Air Force Base to evacuate its passengers and return to its original status. The drone would pick up the scheduled flight plan and, over Cuban waters, transmit a Mayday signal before being blown up by remote control. The plan is rejected by McNamara, and President John F. Kennedy personally removes Lemnitzer as chairman of the Joint Chiefs of Staff.
But this is the first time since 1948 that a president has made an official visit to Dallas. Here comes the big jet in.
Here's a cheer going up now as a big jet lands with the United States of America on it. Boy, that's a beautiful ship, a 707, U.S. Air Force One. There it is. The President of the United States seal on the nose. And here comes the President of the United States. There's no trouble at all spotting Mrs. Kennedy with a bright pink dress, a wool dress, pillbox type hat.
Clear blue sky and a warm sun. Beautiful day now, just a beautiful day. Boy, this is something. The press is standing up high, getting a lot of shots of this. He's broken away from his plan and gone right up to the fence to shake hands with people. This is great for the people and makes the eggshells even thinner for the Secret Service, whose job it is to guard the man.
And the motorcade begins to move out. The President and the First Lady sitting in the back seat. As we said, the top is down. They are not using the bubble, so it'll be an open limousine parade. Immediately following the presidential limousine, a car loaded with Secret Servicemen. It is our understanding that the motorcade will be moving slowly enough so that everyone along the route will have a good look at the chief executive.
Good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen. You'll excuse the fact that I'm out of breath, but about 10 or 15 minutes ago, a tragic thing, from all indications at this point, has happened in the city of Dallas. Let me quote to you this. And you'll excuse me if I am out of breath. A bulletin, this is from the United Press, from Dallas. President Kennedy and Governor John Connally have been cut down by assassins' bullets in downtown Dallas. They were riding in an open automobile when the shots were fired. The president, his limp body carried in the arms of his wife, Jacqueline, has rushed to Parkland Hospital.
President's wife, Jackie Kennedy, was not hurt. She walked into the hospital at her husband's stretcher side.
Under the aegis of urban renewal and the influence of one of New York's most famous heirs, David Rockefeller, grandson of Standard Oil founder and billionaire John D. Rockefeller. In 1958, Rockefeller spearheaded what was called the $1 billion plan to stimulate business and revitalize Lower Manhattan.
David Rockefeller was then the chairman of the Chase Manhattan Bank. And so David had an idea. Why not create, using the Port Authority of New York and New Jersey, a World Trade Center, whatever that was.
David's got big plans.
Everybody knows the Chase Bank may be the most powerful bank in the world. David Rockefeller might be the second most powerful person in the United States after the president.
The downtown Manhattan area is one of the most valuable and uniquely situated pieces of real estate in the entire world. The central core area of towering skyscrapers is surrounded by acres of marginal buildings, the majority of which are more than a century old and only partly occupied.
David Rockefeller was masterful in his introduction of the World Trade Center idea. And that idea was considered brilliant. He was called the $1 billion planner by the New York Times. Although he only really proposed it, the fact that he proposed it really is why the World Trade Center was built.
The Trade Center was realized at a time when there was what could be described as a paradigm shift.
There had been a movement of many businesses and financial institutions from Lower Manhattan to Midtown or across the river or away from New York altogether. It seemed to us that major towers would draw attention to Lower Manhattan and probably strengthen it as a center. So we prepared plans for the Twin Towers and presented them to the governor of New York, who happened to be my brother at the time.
Very shortly, you're going to have a great thrill when you see the actual design and plan for this great center.
Final plans called for a complex of low-level buildings surrounding two 1,350-foot towers, the tallest ever built. Their great height was made possible by the use of load-bearing walls. Extremely tall buildings were traditionally inefficient, since huge amounts of interior space were taken up by structural supports and elevators. The Trade Center towers would overcome this problem. The exterior walls were designed to bear much of the weight of the towers, as well as all of the wind loads. The only internal supports would be in a central core of columns.
It was the 1950s and 60s before urban planners began to think big again. Lower Manhattan was deteriorating, and a radical plan for its revitalization was championed by David Rockefeller and his brother Nelson, then governor of New York. With Mayor John Lindsay on board, they set out to build a trade center, the likes of which the world had never seen, and on a shocking scale. Two 110-story towers with enough office space to equal 50 city blocks. But first, they had to overcome what architects and civil engineers had known for decades.
In 1969, from 70 feet below street level, the first tower rose toward its 1,350-foot destination.
I think many people just reacted to it as though it was some sort of Martian implant.
The colossal towers were, in many ways, the last of their kind.
244 steel columns placed approximately 2 feet apart, which supported 40% of the weight of the towers. The internal structure was comprised of 47 steel columns. It was the core structure to support the majority of the weight of the building, 60% of it, and not the external structure. This is the same core structure near the base of the tower. The core structure was an actual, extremely robust steel skyscraper built within another skyscraper.
By the 1990s, the New World Order set in motion a half-century before had succeeded in ways no one could have imagined in the years following the end of World War II, or even as the towers themselves had first begun to rise at the very height of the Cold War.
July 24th, 2001, Larry A. Silverstein, who already owned World Trade Center 7, signs a $3.2 billion 99-year lease on the entire World Trade Center complex 6 weeks before 9/11. Included in the lease is a $3.5 billion insurance policy, specifically covering acts of terrorism. September 6th, 2001, 3,150 put options are placed on United Airlines stock. A put option is a bet that a stock will fall. That day, put options were more than 4 times its daily average. Bomb-sniffing dogs are pulled from the World Trade Center, and security guards end 2 weeks of 12-hour shifts. September 7th, 2001, 27,294 put options are placed on Boeing stock, more than 5 times the daily average. September 10th, 2001, 4,516 put options are placed on American Airlines, almost 11 times its daily average.
September 2000. The Project for a New American Century, a neoconservative think tank whose members include Dick Cheney, Donald Rumsfeld, Paul Wolfowitz, and Jeb Bush, releases their report entitled Rebuilding America's Defenses. The report calls for a massive overhaul of the United States military and encourages fighting and winning multiple theater wars. They declare that the process of transformation, even if it brings revolutionary change, is likely to be a long one, absent some catastrophic and catalyzing event, like a new Pearl Harbor. 17 of the project's participants would later take positions in the next White House administration.
It's going to be a beautiful day today. Sunshine throughout. Low humidity. Really a splendid September day. The afternoon temperature about 80 degrees. Great weather for the primary election. Tonight clear and cool. Low 60 at midtown.
It's begun to sound like some sort of a cliche. But really, September 11th started out like every other day.
Well, currently winds out of the northwest at 6 miles per hour. Relative humidity 70%. 66 in Newark, 64 degrees in Bridgeport, 67 in Midtown, and heading for 80.
All news, all the time. This is 1010 Wins. You give us 22 minutes, we'll give you the world.
Good morning. 64 degrees at 8 o'clock. It's Tuesday, September 11th. I'm Lee Harris. Here's what's happening. It's primary day, and the polls are open in New York City.
It was 8:46 in the morning.
And then we heard a plane come over, and in Manhattan, you don't hear planes too often, especially loud ones.
a plane crash.
There was a reaction on the part of...
Jenny Carr was attending a business meeting on the 36th floor of One Liberty Plaza, across the street from the World Trade Center, and caught the entire first attack on tape. A second explosion could be heard 9 seconds after the crash.
Sound like some crash.
The windows in the lobby of the North Tower were blown out, and marble panels were blown off of the walls. This was brushed off as damage from a raging fireball that went barreling down the elevator shafts. However, the World Trade Center's core and elevator shafts were hermetically sealed, aka airtight. The fire could not possibly have had enough oxygen to travel 1,300 feet down, retaining enough energy to destroy the bottom 8 floors of the building.
I remember tilting the camera back and forth between the people and the tower in front of me.
On the underside of the fuselage, an extra piece of equipment is visible. When questioned about this, Boeing representatives refused to discuss it due to national security. This is what the underside of a Boeing 767 should look like. The following footage is taken from the documentary Why the Towers Fell. Whoa, whoa, whoa. Bring it back. Did you catch that? A missile is fired seconds before impact. Skeptics claim that the flash is the fuselage colliding with the building. If that were the case, it would look like this. Also, notice that the flash is reflected in the fuselage of the plane. The flash is also present in footage taken by Evan Fairbanks, Jennifer Spell, and CNN. Al-Qaeda certainly couldn't have added this equipment at Logan International Airport. And even if they did, the flight crew would have noticed it. So where did this plane come from?
An attack on America coordinated with military precision.
When the transponder is turned off, the controllers lose the information on the altitude, but they can still track the plane as a primary signal. The following example shows how long it took an air traffic controller to find American 11 on his screen after he was told the plane had been hijacked.
Good morning, Washington. I got a situation here with American 11. We believe it's a possible hijack.
Okay, tell me more.
We lost radio communications with him, then we lost his transponder, and right now the aircraft is just west of Albany going southbound.
Okay, I see him.
United 175 never turned the transponder off. It just switched codes.
United 175 is 50 miles northwest of New York City when its transponder code is suddenly changed.
As I look up, I notice that United 175's code has changed. I just turned around and radioed the pilot. My exact words were, United 175, recycle transponder squawk.
Hijacker Al-Shehhi obviously intended to turn off that transponder, but because he just changed codes and didn't turn it off, he still left the controllers with a very clear indication of the normal return from an aircraft that was squawking, that's what we call it, with the altitude.
According to the Secret Service, the plane that hit the Pentagon was tracked for at least 30 minutes before it reached Washington.
Nelson Garabito was the Secret Service agent in charge of protecting the White House airspace.
First thing I did is I picked up the phone to call my contact, the FAA. He said we have 4 planes outstanding. 2 have hit the towers, and 2 are headed to Washington, D.C. One of them approximately 30 minutes out, one of them approximately 45 minutes out.
The one 30 minutes out turned out to be the plane that hit the Pentagon.
As the one nearest us got closer and closer, 6 minutes out, 5 minutes out, we knew it was sort of over the CIA, and we thought, is that where it's going? But it kept coming.
United 93 was also being tracked after the hijacking.
We were tracking United 93, and I was in conversation with the FBI agent, and he was relaying to me that we suspect that this aircraft has now been taken over by hostile forces, described a sharp turn it made over eastern Ohio, and now is heading back along southwestern Pennsylvania.
The airplane was being followed step by step, practically in real time.
Right now he is west of Johnstown still, 12 miles.
At some point, it even turned the transponder back on, showing not only its position, but also the altitude.
It looks like he's still turning. Hey, his transponder just came back on and it was showing 8,000 feet, 200. 8,200 feet? 8,200 feet, and he's on the same code that he was before.
Save for some moments of confusion, the 4 airplanes were being tracked by air traffic controllers all along. Each airplane has a specific maximum operating velocity, called VMO, which should never be exceeded at low altitudes. Never means never for a reason. Should the VMO be exceeded, a phenomenon called flutter can occur, which can quickly cause irreversible damage. The flutter phenomenon can affect any kind of airplane, from large military bombers to small single-engine airplanes. Once the VMO is exceeded, not only are the wings and the ailerons at risk, but also the fuselage begins suffering from the air pressure caused by the speed. The maximum operating speed for a 767, 2 of the 4 hijacked airplanes, is 414 miles per hour. For the other 2 airplanes, the 757s, the VMO is even less, 402 miles per hour. Yet on 9/11, all 4 airplanes were flown at speeds close to or beyond 500 miles per hour near sea level without suffering any visible structural damage, while remaining perfectly under control all the way into their targets.
American 11 hit a pretty astonishing rate of speed, almost 500 miles an hour.
United Flight 175
impacted World Trade Center Tower 2 at approximately 510 knots ground speed. 510 knots is 586 miles per hour. That's almost 200 miles per hour beyond the maximum operating velocity of a 767. American 77 crashed into the Pentagon, says the Commission report, traveling at approximately 530 miles per hour. United 93 plowed into an empty field in Shanksville, Pennsylvania at 580 miles per hour. These exceptional speeds, achieved at low altitudes, have raised more than an eyebrow among aeronautical experts and pilots alike, especially those who had flown the actual airplanes involved in 9/11.
I flew the 2 actual aircraft which were involved in 9/11, the flight number 175 and flight 93, the 757 that allegedly went down at Shanksville, and flight 175 is the aircraft that's alleged to have hit the South Tower. I don't believe it's possible for a terrorist, a so-called terrorist, to train on a 172, then jump in the cockpit of a 757, 767 glass cockpit, and vertical navigate the aircraft, lateral navigate the aircraft, and fly the airplane at speeds exceeding its design limit speed by well over 100 knots, make high-speed, high-bank turns, pulling probably 5, 6, 7 Gs, and the aircraft would literally fall out of the sky. I couldn't do it, and I'm absolutely positive they couldn't do it.
How do you feel about United 175 reaching 510 knots?
Physically impossible. To have a clocked airspeed of 510 knots with a commercial airliner at sea level is physically impossible.
Flight 175 that hit the second tower, they said it was going at roughly 560 miles an hour at sea level.
No, that's impossible. You need so much power to push yourself through that air. So the engines have the right amount of horsepower for cruising at 30,000 feet at 500 plus miles an hour. To do that at ground level, you need 6 times that amount of power. Those engines can't put out 6 times more power. If you changed out the motors so they were motors that had 6 times the thrust, then theoretically you could, but then the structure is not strong enough. Under all circumstances, I'd say an absolute resounding no.
To me, it's impossible. Any pilot that has been in a commercial jet would probably laugh at if you said 510 knots.
Is it possible to fly over 500 miles an hour at sea level?
No. It would be above the indicated airspeed would be greater than its maximum speed at sea level.
Even, say if it was even in a shallow type of dive, would it be able to?
Any airplane can be dive, of course, then you've got the assistance of gravity, right? But there comes a point where the drag of the air overcomes the aerodynamics of the airplane.
For a final word, the same researcher has called Boeing Corporation.
So there's no way that it could be going 500 miles an hour at 700 feet altitude then?
Not a chance. Not that fast.
Perhaps one of the most controversial pieces found was an engine recovered on Murray Street.
which could easily provide positive identification of the aircraft. Based on location, it would suggest this engine came from the aircraft which impacted the South Tower. Some have claimed this piece was planted, since it appears to be under an awning and scaffolding, combined with the fact that there aren't any signs of damage to the surrounding area due to engine impact with the ground. Based on the estimated height and speed calculations, the trajectory and location of the engine is consistent with the initial aircraft impact. Did this engine come from a standard 767? The aircraft reported to have impacted the South Tower is claimed to have been tail number N612UA, a standard 767-200 containing Pratt & Whitney JT9D 7R4D engines. Closer inspection of the engine on Murray Street reveals these curved tube structures, which are named Toby ducts. These are used to cool the turbine within the engine. However, when searching for this part, this cooling assembly belongs to a different engine than the one reported on the aircraft claimed to have impacted the South Tower. Remember, the aircraft reported to have hit the South Tower should have been using JT9D 7R4D engines. But this is the cooling duct for such an engine. Not this one. This is proof the engine did not come from a standard 767 and is fatal to what we have been told regarding 9/11. This engine is used on the 747, which is capable of much higher speeds than the 767.
Whenever this evidence is presented to people, you'll usually get one of many different questions. The first one being, if different planes were used, what happened to the original ones? Unfortunately, there is no way to know what really happened. But if we could examine the black boxes from the planes that were used, we could prove that they weren't the original flights. A commercial plane carries two different black boxes. Each black box carries one of two different recorders, a cockpit voice recorder and a flight data recorder. The cockpit voice recorder records sounds from inside the cockpit, including engine noise, stall warnings, and other sounds of interest. Communications between air traffic control, weather briefings, and conversations between pilots and crew are also recorded. The flight data recorder records at least 28 different parameters such as time, altitude, speed, and heading. Some also record more than 300 other in-flight characteristics, anything from autopilot to smoke alarms. The recorders themselves are made from the most impervious metals known to man, and the information is recorded along with date and time and spooled into a continuous roll. Any damage that is done to the roll is done to the outside, as opposed to the inside where the data is. The 9/11 Commission says the CVRs and FDRs from American 11 and United 175 were not found. Yet, the FBI claims to have found the passport of Saddam al-Sakami, which managed to fly out of his pocket, through the explosion, and onto the streets of Manhattan below. So, 4 different black boxes, made from the most resilient materials known to man, were destroyed. Yet, a passport, made from a fragile material known as paper, managed to survive? Who writes this stuff? Ted Lepatkowitz, spokesman for the National Transportation Safety Board, told CBS News that it's extremely rare that we don't get the recorders back. I can't recall another domestic case in which we did not recover the recorders. Turns out Ted's right. Nicholas DeMasi, a firefighter who helped the recovery efforts, claims in the book Behind the Scenes, Ground Zero, "At one point, I was assigned to take federal agents around the site to search for the black boxes from the planes. There were a total of 4 black boxes. We found 3. I guess it all comes down to who you'd rather believe."
Video now of New York Mayor Rudolph Giuliani holding up what he says is one of the flight recorder boxes recovered from the debris around the World Trade Center. If this turns out to be the case, this is a big breakthrough for investigators. Now, I'm told we have a technical problem with the videotape. Can't play it for you just yet, but this would be, if not a bulletin of the hour, certainly an urgent on anybody's news wire, that Mayor Giuliani says and holds up what he says is one of the flight recorder boxes. We'll be trying to show you that video shortly. We've made a mistake. I've made a mistake. I'd rather be dragged behind a horse than be inaccurate. But the responsibility for this is mine, and blame is mine. I said a moment ago, a few minutes ago actually, that we had video of Mayor Rudolph Giuliani holding up one of the flight recorders recovered from the debris at the World Trade Center. That is absolutely unequivocally false. That did not happen. We don't have any such video, and I apologize for the mistake, and you can be assured that I'm redoubling my efforts and our efforts not to make that kind of error again. The mayor did hold up a photograph of flight recorders, but there's no flight recorder has been recovered so far as we know, and I do apologize to you for that mistake.
Jesse Ventura meets a Ground Zero rescue worker. Mike Ballone says he witnessed a 9/11 cover-up, the recovery of the black box flight recorders from the attack jetliners. The 9/11 Commission report says the boxes were never found. Ballone was a volunteer at Ground Zero. He did recovery and rescue work for 257 straight days. On one of those days, he says he witnessed something he wasn't supposed to see.
From the very day that 9/11 happened, you were there every day.
Right.
And you were there the day that you saw the black boxes at some point. Was it nighttime that happened?
Yes.
It was nighttime. So at how many days in? Would you have any idea?
I would say the end of September to the beginning of October, somewhere around there.
Literally
about 3 to 4 weeks.
3 to 4 weeks after the collapse, the particular night you're there working. And take us through what happened that night, the night of the black boxes.
Nick, who was the other ATV man, the FBI was loading all their telesponders and all their fancy equipment onto the back of his rig.
And these are the things that will locate the black box?
Yes.
These are the type of devices
the locators.
The locators.
He was to escort these FBI agents into the area so they can look for the boxes. They had found one that I know of, that I actually physically saw. And when he was finished, he came back and told me that they had found 2 more.
You actually saw one?
I actually physically saw one.
And Nick told you that they found 2 more for a total of 3 of the 4?
Yes.
Okay.
And the FBI looked pretty happy about it. And that was the last I saw of it.
FBI Director Robert Mueller said Flight 77's data recorder provided altitude, speed, headings, and other information, but the voice recorder contained nothing useful. And Donald Rumsfeld said the data on the cockpit voice recorder was unrecoverable. As for Flight 93, it was the only flight where the cockpit voice recorder was recovered. It was played for the families in April 2002, but not before they signed an agreement saying that they wouldn't talk about it. They couldn't even take notes. And for some reason, the last 3 minutes of the tape was unaccounted for. The FBI had no explanation for the discrepancy. Why would the 9/11 Commission tell us Flight 11 and 175's recorders weren't found? Why would Robert Mueller tell us that there's nothing interesting on Flight 77's? What's on the last 3 minutes of Flight 93's cockpit voice recorder? These are vital questions that need to be answered. And according to the FAA, Both N591UA and N612UA, flights 93 and 175, are still valid, but flights 11 and 77 are listed as destroyed. Not to mention that they were not even scheduled to fly on September 11th.
The one that I saw going down Fifth Avenue before it made a turn looked very white.
Jet was coming too low. It was white with a red tail. It was coming too low. And it was like a bullet going straight.
You also got some red and white something going over the building. The plane just vaporized like nothing. All of a sudden the plane was there. All of a sudden you see a big explosion. The plane's gone. And sir, what did you see?
I saw the same thing he did. I just saw right above me, like 50 feet, there was this blue plane and it started going and then it angled right in and then like it was aiming towards it.
I looked up, I saw a blue and white jet, 2 engines, no markings that I could identify other than blue stripes on a white plane.
It just seemed like a smaller plane. I don't think it was anything commercial.
I heard this really, really loud noise go by and I thought it was an Air Force jet.
It had to be a 737 and had to hit the World Trade Center. It was a big, big plane.
Now, we had an earlier eyewitness that told us he thought it appeared to be a 737.
It sounded like a missile, not an airplane.
It sounded like one of those military planes that you see at an air show. Same type of sound of a low-flying jet, just, very loud, fast engine noise. It definitely did not sound like a propeller plane. And it definitely did not sound like a helicopter. It was a jet of some kind. And it was the typical sound that you hear, in a war movie of some kind, where first you hear the jet zooming overhead, and then you hear an explosion.
I heard clearly what was a sound barrier being broken sound. The whoosh of the jet, and then the explosion, which I thought was a sound barrier being broken. And when I looked up, I saw the first hit on the World Trade Center. But I saw no plane falling into the street, as I would have thought would happen if it were a plane. And I thought perhaps it was a missile.
A very large jumbo, which might have been an Airbus with navy blue and bright red markings, which might have been an American, some sort of American plane.
The second plane was an unmarked silver fuselage.
It was the 2 shades of gray with a red stripe along the middle.
Okay, so you're saying United Airlines.
It looked huge. I couldn't tell exactly what kind it was. It was just tremendous. I was just saying to my coworkers, look at the size of this thing. It looks like, some kind of stealth fighter or something.
It was gray on the top plane. It was about the size of one of the shuttles, maybe coming from D.C. area.
There it was, another plane. The plane wasn't no airline or anything. It was a twin-engine, big gray plane.
Mark Bernbach, a Fox employee, is on the phone with us. Mark witnessed this from what we understand. Mark, were you close enough to be able to see any markings on the airplane?
Hi, gentlemen. How you doing? Yeah, there was definitely a blue logo. It was like a circular logo on the front of the plane, definitely towards the front. It definitely did not look like a commercial plane. I didn't see any windows on the sides.
Mark, if what you say is true, those could be cargo planes or something like that. You said you didn't see any windows in the side?
I didn't see any windows on the sides. I saw the plane flying low. I was probably like a block away from the subway in Brooklyn, and that plane came down very low. And again, it was not a normal flight that I've ever seen at an airport. It was a plane that had a blue logo on the front, and it did not look like it belonged in this area.
It looks like another fighter jet is what it looks like.
Jim, what you're saying could be a drone aircraft. That's an aircraft that's guided electronically to its target without having a pilot. Jim, I don't know whether we've confirmed that this was an aircraft, or to be more specific, some people said they thought they saw a missile. I don't know how people could differentiate, but we might keep open the possibility that this was a missile attack on these buildings.
But I know it was a black plane. It looked like a fighter jet.
It looked like a fighter jet.
Did you actually see the jet itself?
Yes.
And what type was it?
It was gray, to be honest with you. It was gray.
No, it wasn't a commercial airline.
No, that second one wasn't no commercial.
No, the second one definitely. The first one I never saw. The second one I saw was big, though.
Yeah,
big enough.
It was no Cessna.
No.
It was no Cessna.
But it didn't have any markings on it that I saw.
No, I didn't see any. The second one, it didn't have, like no camouflage or anything.
No, and no emblems, no logos.
It was like charcoal. It didn't look like a regular plane.
It was like a darker color than you normally see a commercial plane.
It was a military plane.
It was very strange to see like a military plane.
When you saw the second one happen, what did it look like?
And it was a much smaller plane, but someone said it looked like a military plane.
I'd say it was like a 2-engine plane or something. But it didn't look like an airliner to me because it was black.
This one did it on purpose.
Okay.
Like a black plane. Yeah. We see it going around. He went. Yeah.
The Twin Towers on fire, and he told me that the planes went in and they were black. There was one black plane.
I could not figure out on a bright, sunny, cloudless day what this black thing was that was approaching the building.
As we're watching the buildings, I saw a black, very large airplane fly right into the second building. Came out of the south.
The one I only saw actually the second one. Saw the second one. Big 747? No, like that.
Well, get a big enough one.
The last thing I saw before the second attack was the silver underside of the plane.
That was not American Airlines. That was not an American Airlines.
The United 175, the hijackers were heading towards the city. We were counting down the altitudes, and they were descending right at the end at 10,000 feet per minute. That is absolutely unheard of for a commercial jet. It is unbelievable for the passengers in the back to withstand that type of force as they're descending. They're actually nosing the airplane down and doing it what I would call a power dive.
It was highlighted to me so that I could watch it as it came in from the southwest and then made a direct turn towards the South Tower.
When it made that direct turn, did you think, oh my God?
I thought it was a fighter jet coming in to cover the city.
Jet comes like a stealth, shuts its engines, goes right over our head, and just goes right into the ground.
It came from here?
It came from right over here. It wasn't a stealth, it just came in dead quiet, engine off right over our head.
This was a South Korean military plane that exploded. Special be advised, rescue force with a U.S. Air 737.
I was standing by this window with lots of other people in the office when we saw this blue and red plane coming by and smash into the South Tower. And people thought it was a movie. You know, it was unreal. We were so stunned. Nobody believed that this was for real.
This gives you an idea of the size of what we're talking about. There are 131 stairways in this building, 13 elevators. You know, there are 7,000 windows. It's 6 million square feet of office space. It's a remarkable building. It cost $49 million to build back in 1941, and we're told it took about 16 months to build it.
And I looked off, looked out my window, I saw this plane, a jet, American Airlines jet coming, and I thought, this doesn't add up, it's really low. And I saw it, it just went, I mean, it was like a cruise missile with wings. Went right there and slammed right into the Pentagon.
I was just casually looking out the corner, out of the window. In the corner of my eye, I saw what looked to be maybe a 20-passenger corporate jet, no markings on the side.
I watched this. It looked like a commuter plane, two-engine, come down from the south, real low, proceed right on and crash right into the Pentagon.
It certainly looked larger. Every once in a while there's a flight path difference for smaller private planes that come in. This was not a small private-looking plane. It looked more like sort of a commuter-type plane.
It sounded like a military jet flyover that they do sometimes, you know, very, very low altitude.
Nobody knew that was a commercial flight at the time. Nobody knew that was American 77.
What did you think? It was a military flight of some kind?
I thought it was a military flight. I thought that Langley had scrambled some fighters and maybe one of them got up there.
It was really moving fast.
It was moving very fast. Like a military aircraft might move at a low altitude.
Did you see the plane come in, sir?
No, I didn't see no plane, didn't hear no plane.
You could tell it was like a suicide bomber. But I'm not saying there was a bomb, but, you know, it was a plane. And it just came, it came streaking down and it hit short. It didn't go into the top of the Pentagon. It came like in short.
For an aircraft to crash, it seems, next to the Pentagon. It appears the building itself was not hit.
At first, there were some conflicting accounts about whether an airplane was actually involved because a lot of people in the Pentagon did not hear an airplane flying overhead.
People who were in the building, who came running from that part of the building, thought it was a bomb of some kind.
Apparently, possibly a helipad at the Pentagon had been blown up.
I didn't see the plane hit the Pentagon. I wonder where the plane went. It was quiet. I mean, it was quiet. And I wonder why is it so quiet?
I was able to see a white jet, like a Gulfstream type commuter jet, I guess.
No, the plane was white and has stripes, you know.
Well, the plane was white?
Yeah.
It was white with maroon writing on it.
The plane looked white?
Yes.
And it had maroon writing?
It looked like it. I just saw a blur of numbers on the back of it.
Numbers?
At the side, the number of the plane.
It was white. Yeah.
Did you see any other colors?
No.
What did it look like? What color did it look for you?
White. It was white.
White.
Mm-hmm.
Did it look more gray or silver?
No, it looked white to me.
It looked white.
A white plane. I remember on the tail there was numbers.
Numbers.
But little, you know, you see the wing, the tail,
Mhm.
and you see it, and the numbers. There were probably like 3 numbers on the top of it.
Mhm.
They were black, but they weren't big. They were just like medium size.
What we do know is that a 757 has 2 Pratt & Whitney engines made of titanium alloy, which are 9 feet in diameter, 12 feet long, and weigh 6 tons each. A Boeing 757 is 155 feet long, 44 feet high, has a 124-foot wingspan, and weighs almost 100 tons. Are we supposed to believe that it disappeared into this hole without leaving any wreckage on the outside? Why is there no damage from where the wings, or the vertical stabilizer, or the engines would have slammed into the building? Remember how big the engines were? If 6 tons of steel and titanium slammed into the Pentagon at 530 miles per hour, they would bury themselves inside the building, leaving 2 very distinct imprints. And yet, the only damage on the outside of the Pentagon is this single hole, with no damage from where the engines would have hit. Why are the windows next to the hole completely intact? Why are the cable spools directly in front of the hole completely untouched? None of these images from the Federal Emergency Management Agency, taken by photographer Jocelyn Augustino on September 21, 2001, a mere 10 days after the event, show any signs of damage to the foundation at all.
I couldn't believe what happened, and they said it was a plane, and I didn't see any pieces of any plane, and I couldn't believe that a plane hit the building.
I could see parts of the airplane that crashed into the building, very small pieces of the plane on the heliport outside the building. The biggest piece I saw was about 3 feet long. It was silver and had been painted green and red, but I could not see any identifying markings on the plane. You know, it might have appeared that way, but from my close-up inspection, there's no evidence of a plane having crashed anywhere near the Pentagon. The only site is the actual side of the building that's crashed in, and as I said, the only pieces left that you can see are small enough that you could pick up in your hand. There are no large tail sections, wing sections, fuselage fuselage, nothing like that anywhere around, which would indicate that the entire plane crashed into the side of the Pentagon.
Bob Pugh was the first professional cinematographer to arrive on site.
No one was in control of the area. I have free reign. And there's a lot of debris in the foreground of those videos. Again, very small pieces. I mean, I'm standing on pieces, a dinner plate or smaller in size. All the while, I'm looking for wreckage, and I can't find a piece of anything that I recognize. I can't see the tail. I can't see the wheels. I can't see the engines. There's no chairs. There's no luggage.
So who's telling the truth? Take this into consideration. April Gallup was working in the Pentagon's west side when it was hit. In Jim Mars's book, Inside Job, April claims, while in the hospital, men in suits visited her more than once. They never identified themselves or what agency they worked for. They didn't tell her what to say, just made suggestions. For example, to take the compensation money and shut up. They also kept insisting that a plane hit the building. They repeated this over and over. But I was there, and I never saw a plane, or even debris from a plane. I figured this story is to brainwash people.
While I was coming out of the Pentagon, I didn't see any evidence of metal, airplane seats, luggage, nothing that would give me any indication that it was a plane that had hit the building. I did not have jet fuel over my body. My son didn't have jet fuel over his body. The people that I helped didn't have jet fuel on their body. So again, there was nothing on the inside that would give me any indication that there was a plane on that particular day that hit the building. In speaking with everyone, it was conclusive that no one else in the area where I was located had seen any parts of planes or luggage or baggage or anything of that nature. It's obvious, that the official story is it has been fabricated pretty much.
Some consider the location where this plane went in rather fortunate because exactly where the plane went in was an area that had recently been redeveloped and redesigned with very heavy blast walls and fire walls in that new area there. To the right of that devastated area, you see there's not much fire damage. That's because that part of the building had recently been renovated with reinforced blast walls to prevent a kind of bomb attack, not an airplane attack, of course.
It could have been worse. That was the message today. It's just so unusual and so strange and ironic that it crashed in this area. They say it could have spread to several other areas of the Pentagon had there not been these reinforcements that were just the completion of just being done. They said, in fact, they were going to be done in November.
There had been some improvements made to protect against some sort of attack.
The plane struck a portion of the Pentagon that had recently been renovated.
The Pentagon is saying that the good news there is that that part of the building was undergoing renovation recently and at this point had not been substantially reoccupied. So the plane slammed into a part of the building that was largely not being used.
This area in particular was just recently renovated. They've been doing a lot of work, just recently renovated work.
And I took a look at the huge gaping hole that's in this side of the Pentagon, in an area of the Pentagon that has been recently renovated, part of a multi-billion-dollar renovation program here at the Pentagon. It hit at the fourth corridor, if you're familiar with the Pentagon from your Pentagon days, in an area that had just been renovated. That actually is an area where there are a lot of Navy offices. There were also a lot of Army offices along this side of the Pentagon over here that was also affected by the blaze.
The only small bright spot is that in fact it was an area of the Pentagon that had just been renovated and a number of the offices were empty at the time.
Just 1 year before 9/11, the Pentagon's fire protection systems were overhauled. Engineers installed high-powered sprinklers that could handle twice the amount of fire. As luck would have it, these new sprinklers existed in the very part of the building the plane hit. When the plane hit the Pentagon's west side, Bobby Hogue looked out the window and saw fire engulf the building. But that fire never touched him. Why? The answer was right in front of him, in the window.
If someone had come to me in 2000 and said, we need to put a bomb-proof window in your office, I'd have said, get out of here. What are we going to do with a bomb-proof window, Well, guess what? Sure came in handy.
By 9/11, the Pentagon had installed these life-saving features into an area of the building known as Wedge 1. When the terrorists lock onto their target on the morning of September 11, it's this renovated section that appears in their sights.
Every time we've thought about what might happen if the Pentagon were subject of attack, we always assumed that the attack would come on the other side, the river entrance where the brass are. But this attack came on the side facing Arlington Cemetery.
Actually, it was fortunate in a way in that none of the vital offices are located in that section. You had some Army offices here, you had some Navy offices here, but the Military Command Center, the Joint Chiefs of Staff, the various secretaries, including, of course, Secretary Rumsfeld, were in other parts of the building.
Counterterrorism forecaster Marvin Citron authored a report in 1994 for the Department of Defense, warning of Washington's vulnerability to terrorist attack.
We predicted a plane could have crashed into the Pentagon. That's about as specific as you can be. If you made a right turn at the Washington Monument, you could hit the Pentagon. A left turn, you could hit the White House.
He advised back in 1994 that air traffic be controlled over and around all federal buildings, but he says this recommendation was not implemented.
October 24th, 2000. The Pentagon conducts the first of 2 training exercises called Moscow, which simulate a Boeing 757 crashing into the building. So if a Boeing 757 didn't hit the Pentagon, then what did? Eyewitnesses inside and outside the building were thrown to the ground by what they described as a shockwave. Even the Sheraton Hotel, 1.6 miles away, was rocked by the blast. A number of military personnel at the Pentagon specifically mentioned smelling cordite. Cordite and jet fuel have 2 very distinct smells. Cordite is a compound used in ammunition which is comprised of nitroguanidine, nitrocellulose, and nitroglycerin. It is cool burning, produces little smoke and no flash, but produces a strong detonation wave. And eyewitnesses described a bright, silvery flash. Jet fuel combustion, i.e., the planes that struck the Twin Towers, is bright yellow at best. Watch this. A massive smoldering fireball. No silvery flash, no shockwave. And at the Pentagon, a tiny, bright, silvery flash, which shakes nearby buildings. The FBI possessed 85 videotapes that might be potentially responsive. As of this date, we have no clear images of what happened at the Pentagon on the morning of 9/11. If the government wishes to prove once and for all that Flight 77 hit the Pentagon, all they would have to do is release one of those tapes. Instead, they released 5 frames from a camera across the heliport, even though none of them show a 757.
There are no images of the actual impact. The critical moment of impact is missing.
This is the remains of a airplane crash over on Lambertsville Road, and probably had a terrorist bomb on board that blew up.
That it right there? That's it. That's it? That is the whole thing. That is the whole home. As you know, the way it looked to me is the scrapes off to the sides of the main crater with the wings. That's the one I heard. I don't know how accurate.
What is known of United 93 is that it flew west from Newark, but turned around near Cleveland, and as it neared Pittsburgh, it filed a new flight plan.
There were 45 people on board the hijacked United Airlines 757 when it nosedived into the ground at the edge of this old strip mine. Paula Pluta saw it all from her front yard and ran to the place the plane crashed.
Little pieces of metal. There wasn't anything there but little pieces of metal. I unfortunately did not see bodies because I don't think I could have handled that, but just the impact of what's going on in the nation, and here it's just very disheartening because you don't realize how close it can get.
No piece of wreckage was larger than a telephone book. No identifiable bodies were found.
The reason why it's so hard for investigators to find out what happened here is because there's practically nothing left of the aircraft. That crater you see behind me, where all of those workers are, is the point of impact where the plane fell from the sky. And that is all that is left.
What type of debris did you see?
Very little debris.
Did you hear anyone?
No, I didn't. There was really nothing left.
To the naked eye, there's not a whole lot there now.
I want to get quickly to Chris Kanicki. He's a photographer with the Pittsburgh affiliate of Fox affiliate. He was back there just a couple of minutes ago, and Chris, I've seen the pictures. It looks like there's nothing there except for a hole in the ground.
Basically, that's right. The only thing you could see from where we were was a big gouge in the earth and some broken trees. We could see some people walking around in the area, but from where we could see, there wasn't much left.
Any large pieces of debris at all?
No, there was nothing that you could distinguish that a plane had crashed there.
Smoke, fire?
Nothing. It was absolutely quiet. It was actually very quiet. Nothing going on down there, no smoke, no fire. Just a couple of people walking around. They look like part of the NTSB crew walking around looking at the pieces.
How big would you say that hole was?
From my estimates, I would guess it was probably about 20 to 15 feet long and probably about 10 feet long or 10 feet wide.
I expected to see fuselage, remnants of a plane, which I didn't see anything but pretty much smoke and some fires.
I saw absolutely no signs that an airplane was present, no matter what direction I looked.
You didn't know that a plane had crashed there. You had a crater, and the initial crater was probably 15 feet deep, but we didn't have big plane parts laying everywhere.
It looked like the plane had hit, but there's not a lot of evidence of the airplane.
Dennis Roddy was the editor-in-chief of the Pittsburgh Gazette.
Airplane debris? Nothing I could identify.
Possibly the most disconcerted of all was the mayor of Shanksville, Ernie Stuhl.
Ja, mein Schwager und ein guter Freund von mir waren die Ersten hier. Sie haben in Shanksville an einer Straßenecke gestanden und sich unterhalten. Ihr Wagen stand gleich in der Nähe und so waren sie die Ersten hier. Dann kam erst die Feuerwehr. Alle waren wie vor den Kopf gestoßen, weil sie zu einem Flugzeugabsturz gerufen wurden. Aber da war kein Flugzeug. Kein Flugzeug. Sie wurden hier zu der Unfallstelle geschickt und da war kein Flugzeug? Nein, da war nichts. Nur dieses Loch. Das ist es, was Sie sahen. Ich dachte immer, das sei die Absturzstelle. Das ist sie, aber da ist nichts.
Wally Miller, a Somerset County coroner, told the Houston Chronicle, "It looked like somebody just dropped a bunch of metal out of the sky." In the Washington Post, "It looked like someone took a scrap truck, dug a 10-foot ditch, and dumped trash into it." And as for the passengers, I stopped being coroner after about 20 minutes because there were no bodies there. In the Pittsburgh Review, I have not, to this day, seen a single drop of blood. Not a drop.
Somerset County Coroner Wallace Miller.
You have to understand that we're going through this area inch by inch.
He hurried to the scene, an abandoned strip mine. When he arrived, he couldn't believe his eyes.
It looked like someone had gouged about a 10-foot wide, 10-foot deep trough through the strip mine area. But when you looked in, it was just covered with dirt. There was nothing there that you could really say was an airplane. There were just smoking things, pieces of aircraft, just small pieces everywhere. Nothing to indicate that that there was even anybody on the plane. Nothing to indicate that that there was even anybody on the plane. Nothing to indicate that that there was even anybody on the plane.
From what I saw at the initial impact, were very small pieces that you would not recognize as being part of the plane.
A crater in the ground and very, very little in the way of debris. Rick Earl just telling us that the largest piece they found is about 5 feet long.
People who went to the scene, we spoke to one eyewitness a short time ago, said she saw lots of debris but nothing very big. And in fact, that's what our pictures are bearing out, that the debris is very, very small.
There are only small pieces of debris to be found at the scene. At the crash site, there is an impact crater. It appears as a blackened pit on the edge of a green, grassy field.
The force of that crash had created wreckage that what we saw was in trees, it was on the ground, but it was nothing more than a few inches big. We are literally surrounded right now by debris, and there's a very strong odor of the scorched earth. This is the only way I can describe it. It doesn't smell like jet fuel. It smells like, Kendall, how do you describe it?
Just burned earth.
Burned earth. It smells like burned earth.
It's just a giant crater. There is absolutely no sign whatsoever of a giant Boeing 757. No sign whatsoever. Only small, tiny pieces of a plane that used to be.
I heard this thing, you know, I felt the explosion, saw the fireball, and I get up there and I'm thinking, where is it, you know? And I mean, you could see the crater, but I didn't put it together that, you know, it went in the ground at that time, not until later. And just debris, pieces, small pieces of debris, and you know, the trees were singed and burning, smoldering, smoking. Some of the woods was on fire, you know, just small fires, brush fires and smoldering and things.
That's really all you see is a large crater in the ground and just tiny, tiny bits of debris. There has been at least one report that the investigators out there, and there are hundreds of them, as I said tonight, have found nothing larger than a phone book.
United Flight 93 crashed into this cornfield, killing all 45 people aboard. The angle of impact so severe that all you can see now is a giant crater and pieces of airplane, most no bigger than a phone book.
My understanding, the pieces are not a lot larger than a phone book.
The largest piece of which they've been able to find at this point, a chunk of an engine, but most of it no bigger than a telephone book.
What we know at the crash site so far is that not much notable exists there except for a large crater in the ground where the plane apparently made a 45-degree angle nosedive and crashed directly into the ground.
We heard this noise in the sky. My friend and I looked up and said, "What's that?" And just going over, basically over our horizon of the hill was this plane. It was completely upside down is what it was. The tail fin was down, and it was going in at a sharp ascent, probably more than a 45-degree angle.
We were told that the plane was a 45 angle and a nosedive into the ground.
Investigators say the plane crashed at a very steep angle, leaving a gaping hole in the ground, but only tiny pieces of airplane.
Witnesses in the area said the plane hit the ground at a 45-degree angle, causing a tremendous explosion.
Witnesses have said that they saw the plane actually flying upside down with the tail down, and that it plunged into the earth at least a 60-degree angle, possibly straight down, which would account for the small crater about 20 feet around and at least 10 or 20 feet deep. The bulk of the remains of that plane and all the 45 people who are on board may be buried deep in that crater just in the field beyond these trees here.
When an airplane crashes to the ground, normally a plume of thick black smoke rises to the sky and continues to burn until all the fuel is consumed. But instead of being faced by something like that, this is what the people in Shanksville saw. When a plane crashes and makes a hole in the ground, the hole remains open and quite visible from above. This, for example, is the crater caused by Flight Pan Am 103 when it crashed in Lockerbie, Scotland in 1988. Compare the size of a car with the Lockerbie crater and the size of a small truck with the crater in Shanksville. This is the largest chunk of the Pan Am flight that was found near Lockerbie. It's almost half the front part of the fuselage and includes part of the cockpit. This is the largest piece of debris we have ever seen from Shanksville. These are the chunks of the wings that are normally found after a plane crash. These are the marks that the wings of the plane allegedly left on the ground in Shanksville before vanishing with everything else into thin air. And this is the center of the hole, which is supposed to have swallowed practically the whole fuselage. But this is where the official story of the crash becomes truly fascinating. According to the FBI, after 2 weeks of excavation in Shanksville, 95% of the plane had been recovered. A Boeing 757 weighs roughly 100 tons. A mid-sized car weighs about 2,500 pounds, a ton and a half. This means that, according to the FBI, the equivalent of at least 50 to 60 cars was actually excavated from the ground.
September 11, 2001. Two 110-story skyscrapers, completed in 1973, burned for 56 minutes over 8 floors and 103 minutes over 5 floors, respectively, before collapsing completely to the ground. Some argue that this was due to the construction of the Twin Towers. The Twin Towers were composed of 200,000 tons of steel and 425,000 cubic yards of concrete. The core of each tower was a rectangular pillar 87 by 133 feet, comprised of 47 steel box columns ranging from 36 by 16 to 52 by 22 inches. The North Tower was completed in 1970, standing at 1,368 feet tall, and the South Tower was completed in 1973, clocking in at 1,362 feet tall, making them the tallest buildings in the world until the Sears Tower was completed in 1974.
The world's largest commercial complex, completed in 1976. An architectural marvel, its details immense. A massive twin structure, 110 stories tall, built of 600,000 square feet of glass and 200,000 tons of steel, 1,350 feet tall. 43,000 windows, 99 elevators, and a home for 1,200 businesses. Businesses where 50,000 people work. Businesses that include commodity exchanges, investment firms, law firms, banks, restaurants, a hotel, government offices. Atop, an observation deck, a renowned tourist attraction. The Trade Center could draw 90,000 additional visitors on a busy day.
The attack was devastating to some of America's most prominent companies. The biggest tenant, investment firm Morgan Stanley, filled 25 floors of the South Tower. Insurance giant Marsh USA on the 93rd and 100th floor of the North Tower. Pitney Bowes had hundreds of employees spread throughout the two towers. And securities firm Cantor Fitzgerald from the North Tower's 101st to 105th floors.
On the upper levels, the fires had reached temperatures of 1,300 degrees Fahrenheit.
The fire on those floors, probably 1,500 degrees.
Temperatures inside could have built up to 1,600 degrees Fahrenheit.
Entire floors ignited in a raging 1,600-degree fire in mere seconds.
Trapped in a mounting inferno that would reach 1,800 degrees.
At 1,800 degrees Fahrenheit,
the nearly 2,000-degree temperature.
Jet fuel had burned fiercely as high as 2,000 degrees Fahrenheit.
Analysis of the steel from this part of the building reveals that the fire here reached 2,000 degrees Fahrenheit.
High up in both towers, the raging fires were now generating 3 to 5 times the heat of a nuclear power plant, and the interior temperature had soared in places to nearly 2,000 degrees Fahrenheit.
Engineers suspect the temperatures inside the crash areas could have quickly reached well over 1,000 degrees, perhaps approaching 2,000 degrees.
The jet fuel fire produced 2,000 degrees.
The steel holding the tower up was reaching temperatures higher than 2,300 degrees Fahrenheit. The fire inside the towers may have reached temperatures of 2,500 degrees Fahrenheit.
There is a series of thermographic images shot with an infrared camera showing temperatures much lower than those needed to soften steel. This is the North Tower, seen from below. It's 9:18, about a half an hour after the impact of the first plane, and the indicated temperatures do not reach the color yellow, which means they don't exceed 100 degrees centigrade or 212 degrees Fahrenheit. And this is the South Tower, some 15 minutes after the impact of the second plane. Here too, the indicated temperatures do not exceed 212 degrees Fahrenheit.
So what brought down the World Trade Center? Let's ask the experts.
Why did the Twin Towers crumble the way they did? How did they remain standing for so long?
Was there something about the towers?
What caused the initial collapse of the upper section of the towers onto the rest of the building?
The area below the damage zone where the planes flew in and where the fire was, that area below that, those 80 or 90 stories, 80,000 tons of structural steel was not damaged in any way. Yet you stood there and watched it destroy itself, wiping out floor by floor all 287 structural columns as if they didn't exist underneath the damage zone.
The top section pushing on the bottom section, it's going to meet equal forces as it goes. Both sections are going to be demolished at the same rate. So by the time you've crushed up 15 stories below it, the top 15 stories are also going to be crushed. And so there's nothing left now to crush the rest of the building.
Something of this kind is what we should have seen when the top section of the towers collapsed onto the lower one. The upper and lower sections should have mutually destroyed each other until all the energy is dissipated and the system comes to a rest. Alternatively, as shown in this experiment with two towers made of snow, the top section could have fallen off to the side after the initial collapse. What could not have happened is this.
A little tiny chunk of the building can't possibly fall and crush the entire structure below it.
This is such a simple, fundamental concept that architects and engineers were astonished in seeing it totally ignored by NIST. The near freefall speed of about 10 seconds has been confirmed by different official sources. The 9/11 Commission wrote that the South Tower collapsed in 10 seconds. Mr. Sunder from NIST has confirmed similar timings.
The measurements have indicated that Tower 1 collapsed in about 11 seconds and Tower 2 collapsed in about 9 seconds.
Mr. Sunder has also acknowledged that the towers came down practically at free fall speed.
As a result, the entire top of the building came down pretty much in free fall.
The same admission is present in the official report. Since the stories below the level of collapse initiation provided little resistance, the building section above came down essentially in free fall. In the months previous to 9/11, a major renovation of the elevator system in both towers was undertaken. From the March 2001 issue of Elevator World, we read, Ace Elevator undertook what was perhaps one of the largest, most sophisticated elevator modernization programs in the industry's history at New York City's prestigious World Trade Center. No one is suggesting that this company had anything to do with the possible planting of explosives. But such an extensive renovation process would have certainly provided the cover for a special team to access the internal structure of the buildings at any given time. As explained by Richard Heumann, Chief Electrical Engineer for the Twin Towers, the elevator shafts gave direct access to the core columns.
I'm very familiar with the interior structure that surrounded the elevator shafts. And, of course, their access to the elevator shafts gave them total access to the surrounding core columns, the interior of the core columns.
The Twin Towers were designed to sustain the impact of a large airliner traveling at 600 miles per hour and still remain standing. Interviewed in 1993 by the Seattle Times, John Skilling stated, "We looked at every possible thing we could think of that could happen to the buildings, even to the extent of an airplane hitting the side. Our analysis indicated the biggest problem would be the fact that all the fuel from the airplane would dump into the building. There would be a horrendous fire, a lot of people would be killed, the building structure would still be there." And it was. After the impacts, both towers remained standing, showing no major effect on their stability. Furthermore, NIST has confirmed that the initial jet fuel fires themselves lasted at most a few minutes. This means that from that moment on, the only available source of fuel for the fires was common office furnishings. And, as we know, regular office fires are not hot enough to affect the stability of a steel structure.
No steel frame high-rise building has ever collapsed due to fire.
In over 20 years, I have not seen, until recently, a protected steel structure that has collapsed in a fire.
These kinds of designs have performed extraordinarily well over history. In fact, until this occurrence, no building had fallen down because of fire.
Never in the history of modern architecture had a building been known to collapse because of fire.
In the same interview where he praised the solidity of the Twin Towers, John Skilling stated, "I'm not saying that properly applied explosives, shaped explosives of that magnitude could not do a tremendous amount of damage. I would imagine that if you took the top expert in that type of work and gave him the assignment of bringing these buildings down with explosives, I would bet that he could do it."
Other buildings would have toppled immediately, but the towers remained upright for nearly an hour.
But I can reassure everybody that they seem to be holding up fairly well while efforts are going forward to fight the fires.
The World Trade Center is fucking on fire. I don't know if I should try to leave. I don't think it's going to fall. The structure looks intact. But it appears to me the structure is still intact.
The National Institute of Standards and Technology, NIST, eventually concluded in August 2005 that they found no evidence suggesting that the Twin Towers were brought down in a controlled demolition. It's funny they would name it the Report on the Collapse of the Twin Towers, because the report does not explain how the Twin Towers actually collapsed, claiming that it does not actually include the structural behavior of the tower after initiation was reached and collapse became inevitable. 10,000 pages, and not a single one to actually explain how the towers came down the way they did. NIST admitted in April 2007 that they are unable to provide a full explanation of the total collapse, and also that they conducted no tests for explosive residue.
They were miracles of modern engineering, built to withstand high winds pushing against them with a force even greater than the planes that slammed into their sides.
The amount of damage the aircraft did on impact was extremely large. That alone, though, would not have brought the buildings down. We think they would have stood up indefinitely unless there was some other very major event.
In the end, they may never know if fire alone could have brought the towers down.
If I were at the base of that building when the fire trucks pulled up and a chief said to me, "Oh, what should we do? Is there any danger of this thing collapsing?" I would have said, "There's no danger of this thing collapsing," because I know how flimsy a plane is versus the outer wall of steel on this building. So I really thought the building would absorb it.
It could truly be said that it was state-of-the-art or beyond state-of-the-art. It was a true engineering marvel of its time.
One of the innovations was making the external walls the primary support for the towers. These outer columns, tied closer together than was normal at the time, could withstand the impact of a Boeing 707. Though the plane would destroy some of the columns, the building would still remain standing.
One thing I've learned about World Trade Center is that the construction of this structure was almost perfect. There's no construction flaws I've seen. Everything was just done so right, so good. It's just genius design.
There is no way that I thought those towers would ever fall and collapse the way they did. Just not possible. And yet they did.
What's interesting too, though, is that these bolts didn't fail. This was ripped out, but structurally she held together. From all indications, we're seeing a lot of bolts that are in place, and that's testament to the people who built it.
The World Trade Center's exterior skeleton was exceedingly strong, capable of resisting the lateral force of the wind and the unexpected force it would receive 3 decades later. The designers of the Trade Center tried to anticipate every possible disaster. The towers were the first skyscrapers ever explicitly built to survive the impact of a plane.
We had designed the project for the impact of our largest airplane of its time, the Boeing 707. That is to take this jet airplane, run it into the building, destroy a lot of structure, and still have it stand up.
When the World Trade Center was opened, there was little doubt these buildings were as safe as any skyscrapers in the world. Leslie Robertson's radical design seemed to have worked.
I was asked in 1986 what would happen if a plane flew into the Trade Center, and I said it would not knock the building down from the pure physics of the mass hitting the building. But none of us really focused on that kind of a fuel fire.
Initial reports described the fire as super hot due to the thousands of gallons of jet fuel carried by the plane. But the fire experts on the study team found those reports to be wrong.
The role of jet fuel, although it was hot, it only lasted a short period of time. It's very similar to using lighter fluid on a charcoal fire. It ignites the charcoal and then burns out.
The buildings we found performed well. They demonstrated that they could take the hit of a large aircraft and not immediately collapse, and there was no trade-off of safety for economy in construction.
The fact that they were designed to resist over 13,000 tons of wind pressure meant they could not be knocked over. In a remarkably prescient interview given over 15 years ago, Charlie Thornton, one of the investigators, considered the scenario.
Well, 13,000 tons is a lot of force. People always talk about an airplane crashing into a building. And in 1944 or 45, a plane did crash into the Empire State Building.
We designed the buildings to take the impact of the Boeing 707 hitting the building at any location.
I just gave out a movie that shows the Port Authority original footage of the towers being constructed. And I have the videos of the guys actually saying, John Skilling, the lead engineer,
built to withstand multiple impacts.
Yeah, but they admitted that the airplane is like a pencil poking this intense grid. And if you calculate, if you calculate the weight-bearing load, a building like One World Trade Center Tower was designed, in his words, to hold 13,000 tons of pressure. Now the airplane is about 300 tons. So you fly a 300-ton element into a 13,000 ton load-bearing element, 13,000 divided by 300. You would need approximately 40 airplanes per tower for that building to be a towering inferno. One airplane does nothing.
But in the World Trade Center, its tough exterior walls would carry the vertical loads and have the strength to resist the enormous force of lateral winds as well. High-strength steel that had not been available before made this possible.
The building was designed to have a fully loaded 707 crash into it. That was the largest plane at the time. I believe that the building probably could sustain multiple impacts of jetliners because this structure is like the mosquito netting on your screen door, this intense grid, and the jet plane is just a pencil puncturing that screen netting. It really does nothing to the screen netting.
Is it possible that just a plane crash could have collapsed these buildings, or would it have required the sort of prior positioning of other explosives?
The towers were built to withstand 200-mile-an-hour hurricanes, the 100-year storm, the worst nature could dish out. The way the towers collapsed seems similar to pictures we've become accustomed to watching, as old buildings like the Kingdome in Seattle are taken down with explosives. Mark Loaz, whose controlled demolition company does that sort of work, says once a building starts falling, it releases a lot of stored energy.
We use explosives as a catalyst to release that potential energy, converts it into kinetic energy, gets the building moving.
Finally, whoever planned this attack knew a decisive detail about the physics of tall buildings.
The energy required to bring it down is already stored in the structure in the form of potential energy. All the energy used to raise those construction materials into place in the late 60s and early 70s when they built the structure is there if you could just find a way to release it and let gravity take over.
Mark Loiseau is president of a company called Controlled Demolition. Release a building's stored energy, he says, its collapse becomes a matter not of terrorism, but the laws of physics.
You don't have to go to the top floor. You can go almost anywhere in the structure, and given the right circumstances, you can release all of that stored energy, converting it into what is called kinetic energy. That's energy in motion, and that's what brings the building down.
I am reasonably sure that it was not the impact of the planes alone that did this. I mean, I think that's... I don't think you need to be an engineer to hypothesize that something else compromised them. they sort of imploded.
They, in fact, were stronger, more sensible structures than many of the more daring shaped buildings that are being built in parts of the world today.
Right. The term that structural engineers use is redundancy. And the World Trade Center towers really set a new standard in redundancy. And that's why those airplanes were able to crash into the towers without causing the structural failure. The buildings were still standing. And so having these very close spaced columns on the outside created a lot of redundancy. 99% of the buildings in our country would have fallen immediately if they had been hit by a 767.
You see molten steel running down the channel rails, like you're in a foundry. Like lava.
The fires got very intense down there and actually melted beams where it was molten steel that was being dug out.
At one point, I think they were about 2,800 degrees.
Underground, it was still so hot that molten metal dripped down the sides of a wall from Building 6.
Possibly the most authoritative account of all comes from Leslie Robertson, the engineer who had built the Twin Towers.
We were down at the B1 level, and one of the firefighters said, I think you'd be interested in this, and they pulled off a big block of concrete, and there was like a little river of steel flowing.
Molten metal that had literally fallen over one of the arms.
Water drips steadily from the fire hoses up top, still pouring water on wreckage that has smoldered for 12 weeks now.
Mark Loiseau, the president of Controlled Demolition Incorporated, told the American Free Press that in the basements of the World Trade Center, where 47 central support columns were connected to the bedrock, hot spots of literally molten steel were discovered more than a month after September 11th. These incredibly hot areas were found at the bottom of the elevator shafts of the main towers, down 7 basement levels. The molten steel was found 3, 4, and 5 weeks later, when the rubble was being removed. He said that molten steel was also found at World Trade Center 7. The highest temperature was in the east corner of the South Tower, where a temperature of 1,377 degrees Fahrenheit was recorded. The molten steel in the basement was more than double that temperature.
Where is all the rubble? It seems so flattened. How could so much steel and concrete just vaporize? Did it all turn to dust? It's one of the questions we will try to answer in the next little while. When you look at where the towers used to stand, there is surprisingly so little rubble. Where did all the rubble go?
It's a very good question, Peter, and I have asked some people who've been doing some of the rescue and recovery work this morning. If you look behind me, you can see the very remains, the skeletal remains of the World Trade Center. And one volunteer, Robert Gerlinski, explained to me the reason there's so little rubble is that all of it simply fell down into the ground and was pulverized, evaporated.
The official 9/11 story says hijacked jets brought down the towers, not explosive devices.
That's a fucking good one.
No wild conspiracy theories, no detonators and bombs to bring down the towers, all that stupid shit.
In August 2005, the New York Times published 12,000 pages of oral histories, rendered in the voices of 503 firefighters and emergency personnel who were present at the Trade Center on September 11. Over 100 of them, 1/5 of the total, has reported explosions in the buildings prior or during the collapses.
For more than a year, the Port Authority blocked the release of a tape of firefighters' transmissions from the World Trade Center on 9/11. In November 2002, the tape was finally released to the New York Times and other news outlets. Why did it take so long to get the tape released?
I got an eyewitness who said there was an explosion on floor 7-8. 7-8. We just had another explosion on Warren Street because of the secondary explosion. We've got numerous people covered with dust from the secondary explosion. And we got another explosion on the tower, 1013. Number 2 has had a major explosion and what appears to be a complete collapse surrounding the entire area. Who's involved in the secondary explosion at Tower 1K? I've got 5.
To think, the government would have us believe that these massive structures were destroyed by 10,000 gallons of jet fuel. However, Eyewitnesses, video footage, and a little common sense quickly refutes that claim.
So secondary explosions and then subsequent collapses.
And of course it's possible that what John has just described to us is this coordinated attack, and you just think of the sophistication of this, in which the terrorists would have planted bombs, 2 of them, one under each tower, and then they permitted the planes to fly in first. They had to hijack them first, fly them in, hit the 2 towers, and then after the towers burned a while, blow them up from the bottom.
Yes, I am here, Michael.
Jim, tell us what's happening out there.
Oh my We just witnessed some kind of secondary follow-up explosion on the World Trade Center #2, the one that is on the south.
Right now, police have to determine is whether that explosion was caused from the initial impact of the plane or whether it was something that was exploded on the ground. Generally speaking, for a building to collapse in on itself like that, it would seem to indicate, obviously this is just early speculation, but it would seem to indicate that there could have been an explosion, a bomb planted on the ground that would make the building collapse within itself. CNN is now reporting that there was a 3rd explosion at the World Trade Center, probably an explosion from the ground that caused World Trade Center 1 to collapse on top of itself. Again, there was a 3rd explosion. It's unclear what caused it, whether it was a bomb or whether the first plane that crashed into the tower had somehow been booby-trapped with a bomb that was timed to explode later after the crash had occurred.
When we saw the second attack, it was clear,
Very obvious.
It seemed clear it was a terrorist attack. Since that time, we know that another bomb was set off at the World Trade Center.
Another explosion at the World Trade Center. Apparently, bombs may have been placed at the base of those buildings. The mayor only saying he did not believe those blasts after the initial impact had anything to do with a gas leak.
Federal agencies that were down there do believe that there was some sort of explosive device somewhere else besides the planes hitting.
Was the plane loaded with explosives? Was the plane enough in and of itself to crash in the building to bring those 2 towers down? Because you'll see the video, and you've seen it 100 times. It looked like it was a controlled implosion. It didn't fall over. It looked as if somebody put TNT all throughout that building. It pancaked from floor to floor to floor.
Yes.
So, of course, there's speculation here that maybe these planes were loaded with C4 explosives or some type of explosives on timers. That if the plane itself didn't bring it down, that charges would go off and that eventually what happened would happen.
Just moments ago, I spoke to the chief of safety for the New York City Fire Department. The chief, Albert Turry, he received word of the possibility of a secondary device, that is another bomb going off. He tried to get his men out as quickly as he could, but he said that there was another explosion which took place. And then an hour after the first hit here, with the first crash that took place, he said, there was another explosion that took place in one of the towers here. So obviously, according to his theory, he thinks that there were actually devices that were planted in the building. One of the secondary devices he thinks that took place after the initial impact was, he thinks, may have been on the plane that crashed into one of the towers. The second device he thinks, he speculates, was probably planted in the building.
There was a secondary explosion, probably a device either planted before or on the aircraft that did not explode until an hour later.
This is as effective as a bomb being dropped there. There were 2 bombs in effect. Commercial airliners flown into those 2 buildings and they came down. We presume because of the initial explosion there may have been secondary explosions as well that were detonated in the building by these terrorists.
As we were moving towards the building, we saw the top begin to blow out in a plume of smoke, and we heard the noise associated with an implosion.
Police have found what they describe as a suspicious device, and they fear that it might be something that could lead to another explosion. Obviously, there's a real sense of caution here on the part of police. I spoke with some police officials moments ago, Chris, and they told me that they have reason to believe that one of the explosions at the World Trade Center, aside from the ones that may have been caused by the impact of the plane with the building, may have been caused by a van that was parked in the building that may have had some type of explosive device in it. So their fear is that there may have been explosive device planted either in the building or in the adjacent area.
the tower would not have collapsed absent some tremendous trauma.
Absolutely, and that seems to make sense.
Something ignited there, though. Maybe they had that was an incredible.
That was an incredible explosion.
And that does not cause from a.
I agree with you. I think it was the third plane, but again,
no, it could have been something. It could have been something that was planted.
Or a bomb planted in the building. Yeah. There you see the building imploding. Do you see what's happening?
Yes.
Now, what would cause that? I don't know.
Well, you have, I mean, certainly the structure had been weakened by the impact, but you have to wonder if there was something else there. But we just don't know.
Yeah, we don't know, but it looks like.
And at this point, I can't imagine we're getting any word anytime soon.
I don't think. I think we're safe here. I think I'm on safe ground, Bill. I don't think. This was clearly the way the structure is collapsing. This was the result of something that was planned. This is not. It's not accidental that the first tower just happened to collapse and then the second tower just happened to collapse in exactly the same way. How they accomplished this, we don't know.
A possibility that there were so-called secondary devices or bombs located in some of the buildings down there.
I looked up at the south building, the second World Trade Center to be hit, and explosions were coming down the building. It looked as if charges had been set on each floor and they were in succession going off. It just looked that way to me. The building just blew out floor by floor.
Do you know if it was an explosion or if it was a building collapse?
To me, it sounded like an explosion.
You know, when we saw this yesterday, people said, "Oh my goodness, there was a bomb on there. There must have been a bomb that collapsed.
Must have been a bomb below.
Right, that finished the job."
The second building that was hit by the plane has just completely collapsed. The entire building has just collapsed, as if a demolition team set off. When you see the old demolitions of these old buildings, it folded down on itself, and it is not there anymore.
10 o'clock Eastern Time this morning, just collapsing on itself. This is a place where thousands of people work. We have no idea what caused this. If you wish to bring anybody who's ever watched a building being demolished on purpose knows that if you're going to do this, you have to get at the under infrastructure of a building and bring it down. This is what it looked like when one of the trade towers just appeared to either peel away or collapse on itself, but from top to bottom, 110 stories. This was like peeling a banana, except that it was full of people.
We do not know why the second tower collapsed, whether it was, as the expert was talking to you and Steve and Jim, Lori, whether because the core of the building was damaged or whether because of some other kind of detonating device.
The way the streets look was just overcome by smoke, just plumes and plumes of smoke, like a bomb had gone off. Seconds before the explosion happened, there was another renewed kind of interest in really getting people away. Because, of course, out of curiosity, everyone's trying to get close. Everyone's trying to get pictures of the World Trade Center on fire. They started screaming, "Get back, get back. There's another explosion happening." I guess they were being warned on their radios that the top was going to come down.
You heard a big explosion before the building fell?
I saw it as it was happening, and it sounded as if you had 100 of those little black cat firecrackers and you lit them all off at once. That's what it sounded like. It sounded like the finale of the 4th of July.
And as we were coming out, we passed the lobby. There was no lobby. So I believe the bomb hit the lobby first.
Got here after the towers had collapsed, but was in the process of crawling in under that footbridge I was mentioning to pull out a fallen comrade. And his comrade was firefighter was trapped about 500 feet in under some debris down West Street, and he turned around and said he saw a police officer walking with him carrying a 9mm pistol, and he asked him what he was doing, and he said that there were people in the area that were planting bombs after the planes had flown into the tower, that the bombs apparently, and this is just going on what one firefighter told me, police believe that there were bombers that were in the area after the planes hit the towers planting bombs, and that may have been what caused the further devastation. It looked like a bomb went off, and a fireball must have shot right up the street because everything on the street was completely devastated. Vehicles were burnt out.
And it came down. It was like something from TV when you see them implode the stadium when they plan it.
Donald, you're probably the best known builder, particularly of great buildings in the city. There's a great deal of question about whether or not the damage and the ultimate destruction of the buildings was caused by the airplanes, by architectural defect, or possibly by bombs or aftershocks. Do you have any thoughts on that?
Well, it was an architectural defect. You know, the World Trade Center was always known as a very, very strong building. Don't forget, that took a big bomb in the basement. Now, the basement is the most vulnerable place because that's your foundation. And it withstood that. And I got to see that area about 3 or 4 days after it took place because one of my structural engineers actually took me for a tour because he did the building. And I said, I can't believe it. The building was standing solid and half of the columns were blown out. I mean, so this was an unbelievably powerful building. If you know anything about structure, it was one of the first buildings that was built from the outside. The steel, the reason the World Trade Center had such narrow windows is that in between all the windows, you had the steel on the outside. So you had the steel on the outside of the building. That's why when I first looked, and you had big, heavy I-beams, when I first looked at it, I couldn't believe it because there was a hole in the steel. And this is steel that was, you remember the width of the windows in the World Trade Center, folks. I think you know, if you were ever up there, they were quite narrow. And in between was this heavy steel. I said, how could a plane, even a 767 or 747, or whatever it might have been, how could it possibly go through the steel? I happen to think that they had not only a plane, but they had bombs that exploded almost simultaneously, because I just can't imagine anything being able to go through that wall. Most buildings are built with the steel is on the inside around the elevator shaft. This one was built from the outside, which is the strongest structure you can have, and it was almost just like a can of soup.
You know, Donald, we were looking at pictures all morning long of that plane coming into building number 2, and when you see that approach the far side, and then all of a sudden, within a matter of a millisecond, the explosion pops out the other side.
Right. I just think that it was a plane with more than just fuel. I think, obviously, they were very big planes. They were going very rapidly because I was also watching where the plane seemed to be not only going fast, it seemed to be coming down into the building. So it was getting the speed from going downhill, so to speak. It just seemed to me that to do that kind of destruction is even more than a big plane because you're talking about taking out steel, the heaviest caliber steel that was used on a building. I mean, these buildings were rock solid.
Whether there were second explosions, that is to say explosions other than the planes hitting them, that caused this to happen. And you can see that it almost looks like one of those planned implosions. The second tower, it almost looks like one of those implosions of buildings that you see.
We've heard reports of secondary explosions after the aircraft impacted, whether in fact there wasn't something else at the base of the towers that in fact were the coup de grace to bring them to the ground.
I had been through the last bombing, and it sounded just like another bomb going off.
Did you? Bombs going off in the World Trade Center. Bombs going off in the World Trade Center. Bombs going off in the World Trade Center.
They're very strong buildings, as you remember from the blast the last time. So,
as this man is standing here saying they're very strong buildings and that he expected them to continue to stand, we in the background see the buildings collapse, which again feeds that feeling that there was something else, that there may have been something else that brought those buildings down.
There was a lot of talk there in New York of another explosion prior to the collapse of the first building.
Joining me is Jack Kelly. Now, he is a foreign correspondent, war correspondent, and just came back from Israel. He has some information about these attacks. Jack, what can you tell us happened first in New York?
Apparently what appears to happen was that at the same time 2 planes hit the building, that the FBI most likely thinks that there was a car or truck packed with explosives underneath the buildings, which also exploded at the same time and brought both of them down.
Firefighter John Schroeder was climbing the stairs of Tower 1 when he heard the huge explosion from below.
We were heading up to the 24th floor of the stairwell, and all of a sudden our building got rocked. We got bounced around in the stairwell like pinballs, man. And we just said, you know what? Time to go. We came down, it looked like a bomb went off in the lobby. Everything was exploded, everything was gone. We're like, what is going on here? For every window in the lobby to be exploded. I mean, them windows were like as thick as forget it. They were 2-3-inch glasses, you know, come on. They exploded out of the lobby. You know, it wasn't from the jet fuel. No way.
As the first tower came down, there were a series of explosions. It was like boom, boom. You could hear the echoes of the explosions echoing off the different buildings.
The detonation started, and they went boom, boom, boom. Tower number 1, the second tower, collapsed. It was the exact same series of detonations.
There was nobody there. Where the fuck? What did we do? We made it outside. We made it about a block.
We made it at least 2 blocks, and we started running. Floor by floor, instead of popping out.
It was if they had detonated.
Yeah,
detonated. If they were planned to take down a building. Boom, 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 boom.
All the way down. I was watching it and running.
Because once the tower fell, you heard boom, 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 boom.
And we heard this boom, boom, boom.
So it was like boom, 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 like that. And then it started to sound like firecrackers. Crack, 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 crack. And we looked up, and the second tower was coming down.
There were numerous secondary explosions taking place in that building. There were continuous explosions.
We heard this loud, rumbling noise. Boom, 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 boom.
And I can still remember hearing, first of all, this boom, boom, boom explosions.
Suddenly I hear
The whole building just went
boom, boom. And it's just all of a sudden it was like bang, 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 like bullet shots. And then all of a sudden 3 tremendous explosions.
They just blew the tower, blew it.
This is as close as we can get to the base of the World Trade Center. You can see the firemen assembled here, the police officers, FBI agents, and you can see the 2 towers. A huge explosion now raining debris on all of us. We better get out of the way!
That was a bomb that did that.
Oh, God, look at that!
That was a fucking bomb that did that. About 75 flights up, below the fire, I saw from the corner, boom, 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 boom. Just like 20 straight hits. Just went down. As the bombs were going, people just started running, and I sat there and watched a few of them explode. I looked and I could see the corner, and it just started going pop. It just started going boom, 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 boom. And he goes, how fast? I go, like firecrackers. What's going on? It's gonna fall. What's going on? It's gonna explode.
One eyewitness was standing with a crowd of people on Church Street, 2.5 blocks from the South Tower, when he saw a number of brief light sources being emitted from inside the building between floors 10 and 15. He saw about 6 of these flashes, accompanied by a crackling sound before the tower collapsed. Firefighter Louis Caccioli told People Weekly on September 24th, "I was taking firefighters up in the elevator to the 24th floor to get in position to evacuate workers. On the last trip up, a bomb went off. We think there were bombs set in the building."
It was very much like a controlled demolition when you look at it, because the building essentially fell almost vertically down, as if someone had deliberately set blasts to take place to cause the building to fall vertically downward. If you've seen many of the managed demolitions where they implode a building and they cause it essentially to fall vertically because they cause all of the vertical columns to fail simultaneously. That's exactly what it looked like, and that's what happened.
Do you still think the jet fuel brought down the World Trade Center? In all the videos of the collapses, explosions can be seen bursting from the building 20 to 30 stories below the demolition wave. Regardless, I think what happened to the World Trade Center is simple enough. It was brought down in a carefully planned, controlled demolition. It was a psychological attack on the American people, and it was pulled off with military precision.
Looking like a Three Stooges movie covered in plastic, I swear to God. But you got a good thing, man. That's some good shit. Then we went back there. Whoa, 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 whoa! Then the second movie came back 20 minutes later. Looking like a Three Stooges movie covered in plastic, I swear to God. But you got a good thing, man. That's some good shit. Then we went back there. Whoa, 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 whoa!
As we have said before, the collapse of a steel structure due to fire is considered an absolute impossibility in the architectural world.
Steel structural frame buildings, high-rise buildings, simply do not collapse due to fire.
We've never had a steel-framed skyscraper collapse in the United States or internationally.
No high-rise steel structure has ever been destroyed by a fire in the history of construction.
Consequently, if Building 7 was truly brought down by fire, it would have been a totally unexpected event, which would have taken everyone by surprise. It turns out instead that dozens of policemen, firemen, and first responders had been warned that the building was going to come down as early as 5 hours before it happened.
All I can attest to is that by noon or 1 o'clock, they told us we had to move from that triage site up to Pace University, a little further away, because Building 7 was going to come down or being brought down.
Did they actually use the word brought down, and who was it that was telling you this?
The fire department, and they did use the word, we're going to have to bring it down.
Firemen also had been warned of the impending collapse. Fireman Hollowak, we were just hanging out until Tower 7 came down. Fireman Sweeney, we stood and waited for World Trade Center 7 to come down. By 4 p.m., CNN had already picked up the rumor and was spreading it around the world.
We are getting information now that one of the other buildings, Building 7 in the World Trade Center complex, is on fire and has either collapsed or is collapsing.
At 5 o'clock, the BBC announced that the building had already collapsed, even though it was still standing in the background.
We'll probably find out more now about that from our correspondent, Jane Stanley. Jane, what more can you tell us about...
But Tower 7 was still standing behind her.
It almost sounded too far-fetched. Well, unfortunately, I think we've lost the line with Jane Stanley.
On the other hand, it looked like the perfect controlled demolition. It featured the sudden onset of the collapse, the rapid acceleration towards the ground, the symmetrical descent of the structure, and it even appeared to have started the collapse from the bottom, as most controlled demolitions do. Professionals in the field of controlled demolitions, such as Dutchman Danny Juwenko, seem to have no doubt on what had happened.
Dit is controlled demolition.
Zeker weten.
Zeker weten. Er is nagesprongen. Dit is in opdracht gebeurd. Dit heeft een team gedaan van experts. We weten heel goed wat ze doen, die jongens. Zie je vanaf boven gaan? Nee, je gaat vanaf onder.
Die gaat vanaf onder, ja.
Toch?
Ja.
Ze hebben gewoon kolommen weggeblazen. Er is nagesprongen.
This is the video of the event. On the right is one of the two animations released by NIST on the collapse of Building 7.
When you observe the footage of how the building failed, and when you look at the animation of the failure, and compare that to what you actually observe in reality, I think they disproved their own theories. It is impossible for it to fail the way they said.
The second animation released by NIST is even more inconsistent with the real event. While the animation shows a pronounced inward bending of the top of the structure, the video footage shows the entire top section of the building maintaining its shape all the way through the visible part of the collapse. There's even someone who heard a countdown moments before the building collapsed. First responder Kevin McPadden was stationed near Building 7, awaiting for orders from a Red Cross representative.
He kept asking the Red Cross rep, what's going on, what's going on? And all the time he had his hand over the radio while he was getting a countdown. And then he's just like, at the last 3 seconds, he takes his hand off and you hear 3, 2, 1, and he had this like heartbroken face. He's just like, just run for your life. It was about a second or two after the countdown ended that you started hearing the explosions. Now, we're talking about bombs. Because, you know, you get that like, bam! You know, there's like a little explosion and then the force. And then boom, 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 boom. That was the building coming down. He says, well, you got to stay behind this line because they're thinking about bringing the building down. They didn't say what building. They just said bringing a building down. So we're like, okay, you know, we'll take their word for it. You know, we'll stay behind the line.
David Chandler of Architects and Engineers has measured the downwards acceleration of the building from the start of the global collapse.
You can measure the acceleration of Building 7 by video analysis. The slope of the velocity graph gives the acceleration. Note that global collapse starts suddenly, and for the next 2.5 seconds the building accelerates at the rate of 9.88 meters per second squared. In other words, the rate of collapse of World Trade Center Building 7 over the first 2.5 seconds is literally indistinguishable from free fall in a vacuum.
We are on the phone with New York Fire Department Lieutenant David Restuccio. Lieutenant, where are you right now?
I'm at the corner of Northmore Street and Greenwich Street.
Can you confirm it was number 7 that just went in?
Yes, sir.
And you guys knew this was coming all day?
We had heard reports that the building was unstable and that it eventually would either come down on its own or it would be taken down.
Now we go to videotape the collapse of this building.
It's amazing.
Amazing, incredible, pick your word. For the third time today, it's reminiscent of those pictures we've all seen too much on television before, when a building was deliberately destroyed by well-placed dynamite to knock it down.
More devastation followed at the World Trade Center hours after the Twin Towers collapsed. The adjoining building at 7 World Trade Center suffered heavy damage when the tower above it collapsed. Well, just before 5:30 this afternoon, it too crumbled, pancaking almost like a precision implosion. Ironically, the building had housed the city's emergency management office, which relocated before that collapse.
Well, no, there's number 7 coming down. When you think that part of the component of news coverage around the country every year is the excitement and the fun that people get watching an old building being demolished, and they wire it very carefully for days, and it's a very careful operation in order to make sure that a building comes down safely. I think the last one we saw was when they brought down one of the old casinos in Las Vegas. I mean, this is just stunning to see these things come down.
You hear that? Keep your eye on that building as it's coming down.
The firefighters thought it might collapse. Pieces of the building kept falling.
The building is about to blow up. Moving back.
Rescue workers pushed people away from the scene.
We are walking back. There's a building about to blow up.
People starting to run away from the scene, and I turned in time to see what looked like a skyscraper implosion. Looked like it had been done by a demolition crew. The whole thing just collapsing down on itself, and another big, huge plume of gray and white smoke shooting up into the air, and then more of the smoke billowing up the street here. So that's number 1, number 2, and now number 7 that have come down from this explosion, and folks just simply can't believe it. I never thought these things would fall down. I mean, we were watching them. You could see them burning. A lot of it was damaged. There was fire coming out of the top, but I just never for the life of me thought that these huge buildings that have been here so long would actually just fall. And that's what happened. They just crumbled.
Hidden behind the Twin Towers stood 7 World Trade Center.
It was a building that had a lot of security. It was very, very heavily guarded.
On the outside, an unremarkable building, but it had some unusual occupants. The Secret Service, the CIA, the Department of Defense, and the Office of Emergency Management, which would coordinate any response to a disaster or a terrorist attack.
the city's new $13 million high-tech emergency operations center.
The city is better prepared than it ever has been in its history.
The new facility is located in downtown Manhattan, across the street from the World Trade Center's Twin Towers. The command center on the 23rd floor is bulletproof and bomb-resistant, with its own air supply and generators. It's linked to city airports, the Coast Guard, and the Pentagon. Computers will soon have detailed blueprints of every major building in New York City, as well as evacuation routes. Hurricanes and heat waves would be handled here, as well as terrorist attacks. Shortly after the bombing of the World Trade Center, New York City scrapped its existing emergency plans and began writing new ones. A couple of years later, following the bombing of the federal building in Oklahoma City, Congress passed a law calling for 120 of the nation's largest cities to be prepared for terrorist attacks.
I think New York City is very ready, very prepared.
Though New York officials say their facility is not impenetrable, they're confident it could handle even the worst crisis imaginable.
You know, you have to look at what was inside Building 7. You had the largest CIA field office. You had a number of government agencies inside the building. So automatically, for a number of people, myself included, that is enough to at least raise an eyebrow.
Others believe the government also wanted to destroy key files held there about corporate fraud.
In order for the perimeter to fall perfectly and symmetrically, which it pretty much does at Building 7, all of those columns have to be removed within a tenth of a second of each other. Fire cannot do that. Controlled demolition can.
A structural engineer who's joined Richard Gage's group says he can imagine one or two columns collapsing.
It is possible that you could have a local failure as a result of a connection failing. But the likelihood of that failure dragging the entire building in such a fashion that all the columns would fail at the same time is an impossibility.
Impossibility?
Yes.
World Trade Center 7 was completed in 1987. It had approximately 1.8 million square feet, 47 stories, and was roughly 600 feet tall. Each of the floors was approximately 40,000 square feet, which is roughly the size of a football field and equal to the size of the floor plate on each of the towers.
The building was a good building. It was soundly designed. It would still be standing if not for 9/11, and it was state-of-the-art at the time. Absolutely.
World Trade Center 7 had always been considered the starting point for rebuilding. Located north of the slurry wall, 7 had been cleared faster than the rest of the site, and there had been no bodies to recover. Pelted by debris when the North Tower collapsed, 7 burned until late afternoon, allowing occupants to evacuate to safety.
I remember getting a call from the fire department commander telling me that they were not sure they were going to be able to contain the fire. And I said, you know, we've had such terrible loss of life. Maybe the smartest thing to do is pull it. And they made that decision to pull, and then we watched the building collapse.
As a successful property developer, Silverstein would have gained considerable experience in hiring contractors to carry out controlled demolition of buildings. It's reasonable to assume that he would be aware that the term pull is often used by demolition experts to refer to bringing a building down. For example, here's Ground Zero's post-disaster wrecking crew talking about preparing to demolish Building 6.
Hello? Oh, we're getting ready to pull Building 6.
In 2004, I used to watch the History Channel
on Sunday mornings. They had a show on called History Center that I liked, and there was a show on before that called History's Business at 8:30 to 9. So Larry Silverstein was on this show, History's Business, and Larry was the owner of World Trade Center 7, who had taken over the tower complex. He talked about 9/11. At the end, the host said to Larry, very matter-of-factly, he asked him a question. He says, "What happened to 7?" And I had been perplexed about it. Larry very matter-of-factly said, Building 7 was a controlled demolition, using those words. I wasn't suspicious. It was like a head slap moment for me. I said, oh, that makes sense. And the implication, I think he even talked about, is so damaged, and for safety reasons, they took it down.
And he actually, Larry Silverstein himself, you say, used the words controlled demolition.
I would swear in a courtroom. That's what he said, yes.
Is this the quote where he says that the decision was made to pull it?
No, that was on Frontline in September 2002. This had to be 2004. Well, when he said that, and, I said, oh, that made sense. I wasn't asking, when would there have been a chance to set the charges or anything. I didn't think about that. I thought they could do it. And by the way, when I started to realize that there was something wrong, I contacted the History Channel. Every show for years, they would say, if you want this show on DVD or CD or DVD or VHS, just call this number or go to this website. Well, I called them about that show and I asked about it, and they told me that series was not available to the public. The show certainly existed. I saw it. I'm not making this up. I have no reason to make it up. I'm a 58-year-old engineer. It doesn't behoove me to do that.
And so, next thing you know, we've got the designs of a building. And the first design meeting was in April of 2000. And construction began shortly thereafter in 2002.
Childs was brought onto the 7 project by its owner, Larry Silverstein. Now, behind every tall building, there's a tall story, and Larry's is exceptional. In July 2001, he completed the largest real estate deal in New York's history, acquiring the lease for the World Trade Center site, including the Twin Towers, only to see them destroyed just 6 weeks later.
He talked to me just a couple of days after 9/11. He said, we've got to get going. I have the right to build exactly what was there before, so I'm getting the team together and come over to my office and we'll all meet. All the engineers were ready to go. We had the drawings. They were going to just rebuild it. Great, we start tomorrow.
And giving them a big Austin, Texas welcome.
World Trade Center 7 was brought down on September 11th at 5:20 in the evening. The leaseholder of the World Trade Center complex, Larry Silverstein, gave a public interview on PBS in 2002, and he said that they pulled that building, which is a demolition term for intentionally bringing down a building. This man made over $5 billion from those buildings' destruction, and I want to know if there was ever a formal investigation into Larry Silverstein, the leaseholder of the World Trade Center complex, and his ties to this entire event.
I don't believe there's been a formal investigation. I haven't heard that. I don't know that. I do know that that wall, I remember, was in danger, and I think that they made a decision based on the danger that it had of destroying other things, that they did it in a controlled fashion, did it in a controlled fashion, did it in a controlled fashion.
Well, it's been a point of controversy now for more than a decade. A researcher now from the University of Alaska Fairbanks is weighing in.
World Trade Center Building 7 was not struck by a plane, but did collapse hours after the Twin Towers. Well, now Dr. Leroy Hulsey, a civil engineering professor at UAF, he led a 4-year study which reevaluates whether Building 7's collapse could have been caused by fire, as was determined by the National Institute for Standards and Technology in 2008. Hulsey says his findings were a resounding no, and his simulations paint a different picture than the federal agencies.
And so we virtually simulated the building, and we looked at that analysis, and we also virtually simulated what they did. We couldn't get it to do what they were at. They did.
A group called Architects and Engineers for 9/11 Truth paid for this study. The organization is petitioning Congress to call for a new investigation into the World Trade Center destruction. A spokesperson for the organization says one of its supporters approached Dr. Halsey about the research, partly because of UAF's reputation.
When we started talking to Dr. Halsey, it became very clear that the engineering program at University of Alaska Fairbanks was very strong. And Dr. Halsey was the chair of the department, and he had a lot of experience in modeling structures and doing forensic investigations. And so we thought it was a perfect opportunity for us to move forward.
The study is now open for a 2-month public comment period. We'll post a link to the report on our website at ktva.com.
No one has ever produced a single image of these alleged terrorists boarding the 4 hijacked airplanes. All major airports in the world have security cameras practically everywhere, covering every public area of the airport 24 hours a day. But the only image of the terrorists released after 9/11 was this shot from a security camera showing alleged hijackers Abdulaziz Al-Omari and Mohammed Atta going through a security checkpoint. The 2 men, however, are not boarding Flight American 11 from Boston to Los Angeles, but a previous connecting flight from Portland, Maine to Boston in the early hours of September 11. Only in 2005 were some images of the terrorists in one of the 3 airports released. They showed the group that allegedly hijacked Flight 77 passing through security checks at Washington Dulles. But the timestamp, which is always embedded in security camera recordings, was either cropped out or absent altogether. This means that the video could have been shot at any time prior to 9/11, possibly during a dry run the terrorists did along the same routes.
Everybody's assuming these are Islamic terrorists. Well, if so, they've defiled their own religion. Islam does not permit suicide. It says you go to hell if you do something like this.
New York officials revealed at a news conference here in the city that a hijacker's passport was found blocks from the World Trade Center crash site, if you can believe that.
Not far from here, a passerby found the passport of one of the hijackers.
In the rubble outside the World Trade Center towers, we are told rescue workers have recovered a passport and the debris. It belonged to one of the dead hijackers.
Items found since the attack include a passport apparently belonging to one hijacker.
In fact, the passport for one of the hijackers was found some 3 or 4 blocks away.
The FBI tells NBC News it was some distance from Ground Zero that a civilian found a passport lying on the street belonging to one of the suspected hijackers.
And one of the major developments that occurred overnight is that officials found a passport belonging to one of the terrorists. That was apparently found a couple of blocks away.
The FBI announcing that it has found the passport of one of the hijackers who was on board one of those 2 planes that hit the Twin Towers on Tuesday morning.
By the afternoon of 9/11, Osama bin Laden was officially being blamed for the attacks, though a number of international figures would question the United States version of events. The 19 hijackers were painted as radical Muslims, sneaking into the United States without any problem and raising zero suspicion as to what they were planning. First, they were not devout Muslims spending their last days preparing for paradise. In the months and weeks before the attacks, some of the hijackers are spotted several times at strip clubs and make several unexplained trips to Las Vegas. They drink heavily, receive lap dances, buy sex toys, and sleep with prostitutes, spending thousands of dollars within hours. The 9/11 Commission claims that the United States only knew of 3 hijackers prior to the attacks: Nawaf al-Hamzi, Salem al-Hamzi, and Khalid al-Midar. 2 of the hijackers even lived with an FBI informant in San Diego and were visited by Hani Hanjour and Mohammed Atta.
Finally, an intelligence unit by the name of Able Danger claimed to have identified Mohammed Atta and 3 other hijackers 2 years before 9/11. The Department of Defense and White House, of course, officially deny it. FBI Director Robert Mueller claimed that the hijackers gave no hint to those around them what they were about. However, this turns out to be far from the truth. Hijacker Hamza Al-Ghamdi had a flight booked for later on the day of 9/11, and 2 after 9/11, 1 from LA to San Francisco, and 2 within Saudi Arabia.
As if their funding was not suspicious enough, a number of hijackers reportedly trained at U.S. military bases.
The Defense Department's investigating the possibility, as hard as this is to believe, that 2 of the alleged terrorists involved in what happened on Tuesday may have attended schools run by the U.S. military. Now, this is according to a senior defense official.
First, let's meet Hani Hanyor. Hanyor had come to Freeway Airport in Bowie, Maryland 1 month earlier seeking to rent a small plane. However, when Hanyor went on 3 test runs in the second week of August, he had trouble controlling and landing a single-engine Cessna 172.
By all accounts, in Germany and in Florida, Atta and his cousin kept to themselves, except for last Thursday, at this bar in Hollywood, Florida. It's believed both men came in, drank heavily, and then refused to pay the bill. FBI agents showing Atta's passport photo to bar staff and listening to the manager recount the argument.
If there's an issue where you can't pay your bill or something, just tell me, okay? Let's stop, let's cut to the chase here. And the guy got very, very offended, and he said to me, he said, "Oh, I can pay my bill. I'm an airline pilot." And I was like, "Okay." And that's what I told the FBI agents, and they were like, "Oh, really?"
Investigators and others are also hearing from relatives of the accused attackers. In Lebanon, the family of Zayed Jarrah says that if he was indeed on one of the 4 doomed flights, he would have been an innocent passenger and not a terrorist.
We don't think that Ziad is involved in any way or connected in any way to the terrorist party. He might be one of the passengers on the flight. That's all what we know up to now, and we are not sure that he is the same person the media is talking about.
As they fooled federal authorities, they also seem to have fooled their own relatives. The father of hijacker Mohammed Atta expressed disbelief today at his home in Egypt that his son could have been one of the suicide terrorists.
There is absolutely no link between my son and Islamic groups. Mohammed, my son, hates Osama bin Laden like he hates the sinner. He was killed, I do not know, but he called me a few days ago after the attack. Do you see me sad?
The FBI says unless he pulled a last-minute switch, Atta died as he planned when his plane crashed into the North Tower of the World Trade Center.
The chief terrorists, of course, were killed along with everyone else. That makes part of the investigation a little difficult, too, because you have the names on the flight list. But then how do you confirm that those people were actually on board those planes other than simply the fact that they were on the manifest list? Now, that's pretty good proof, right, but it's going to be virtually impossible to prove that they were really on those planes.
Okay, and was it the FBI that released the list of the names of those involved in the attack?
The FBI did release the names of those involved, and they're also encouraging the public by releasing those names to help them in this investigation. We're also expecting in the next few days for them to release the photographs. They've been telling us for the last 2 days that they want to release photographs, but sources are saying that they want to make certain that the photographs match the names. One of the difficulties they're having in the investigation is that these suspects use multiple identifications many times over.
Most of those names are not necessarily going to mean anything. They may be aliases, they may be real names, etc., etc., etc. And all those names could indeed have been made up.
Many of these men may have used aliases, may have used the same names, and also used very similar names. So it's really confusing things because as you come up with computer records, you're not really sure. They might have the same names, but are these really the same men?
Is it possible that the hijackers were merely patsies in a scheme much larger than themselves or Osama bin Laden?
Good evening. Tonight, I can report to the American people and to the world that the United States has conducted an operation that killed Osama bin Laden, the leader of Al-Qaeda.
The image was front-page news in Pakistan today, but in Abbottabad, where he met his end, there was plenty of skepticism. It's all a fake. Nothing happened, said Mohammed, who's been selling newspapers here for 50 years. Shabir says it's a case of mistaken identity. He claims the man in the picture is his neighbour.
His name is Akbar Khan. He owns the house they said was Osama's house. I know him very well.
If the aim was to persuade the doubters, it didn't work here.
This picture is not Osama.
It's very suspicious.
This picture.
It is very suspicious, and it is made by advanced technology.
Made by computer?
By computer, yeah, ma'am.
Who is Osama bin Laden? He's just a character created by America.
Even bin Laden's displays of strength for the Western media were faked. The fighters in this video had been hired for the day and told to bring their own weapons. For beyond his own small group, bin Laden had no formal organization until the Americans invented one for him.
Well, actually, 98% of Pakistan would probably follow along the same line. They believe that Osama is basically a CIA agent who is working undercover to put a bad image of Islam.
Really? So that there is no Osama bin Laden.
A lot of them find it difficult to believe that such Muslims could actually exist.
We could all drive an hour from where we are right now and find many, many people who stand by what Osama bin Laden says in the spirit of Islam.
To be quite honest, that's a very marginalized section of Pakistani society. Islamic extremism that you find here did not really exist in Pakistan pre-9/11.
The reality was that bin Laden and Ayman Zawahiri had become the focus of a loose association of disillusioned Islamist militants who were attracted by the new strategy. But there was no organization. These were militants who mostly planned their own operations and looked to bin Laden for funding and assistance. He was not their commander. There is also no evidence that bin Laden used the term Al-Qaeda to refer to the name of a group until after September the 11th, when he realized that this was the term the Americans had given him.
Bin Laden issues a public statement denying any personal responsibility.
Called for very clearly if he is the perpetrator.
He continues to deny any involvement in a statement released today to a Pakistan-based news agency.
Osama bin Laden insists the United States is blaming the wrong man. In a statement aired on Arabic television this morning, bin Laden denies any involvement with Tuesday's attacks. In fact, bin Laden claims the U.S. consistently blames him for any type of terrorism against it.
Today, the elusive Saudi exile denied it again. His statement read in part, quote, "After the recent attacks which the United States has witnessed, the U.S. government ventured to point fingers at me, accuse me of involvement. The U.S. government has consistently blamed me for being behind every occasion its enemies attack it. On every occasion its enemies attack it. I would like to assure the world that I did not plan the recent attacks, which seem to have been planned by people for personal reasons. As for me, I have been living in the Islamic Emirate of Afghanistan and following its leader's rules. The current leader does not allow me to exercise such operations."
The difficulty with this one is Osama bin Laden has never taken credit for any terrorist attack.
Bin Laden never claims responsibility, nor can investigators trace the attacks directly back to him.
No evidence points directly to bin Laden.
This is a nation anxious to point a finger of blame, anxious to have a villain by name per se.
The skeptics just say, oh, they point the finger at Osama bin Laden.
Because it's easy and we need a face.
Exactly.
We need a face.
We need someone to demonize.
And someone to blame, and someone to demonize, and someone to attack.
It turns out, though, bin Laden has never been indicted for 9/11.
The
legend about Osama bin Laden. He lives in Afghanistan, the mountains, they think, in sort of a bat cave.
The problem for the U.S. is that the name is just that, a name. Bin Laden has no real base, no sitting target. And even if he could be killed, it wouldn't necessarily mean the end of Al-Qaeda. Bin Laden is as much a phenomenon as he is a man, one expert here said, and you can't kill an idea.
Until the government can prove without a shadow of a doubt that Al-Qaeda was behind September 11th, the American people have every reason to believe otherwise.
What many Wall Street analysts believe is that the terrorists made bets that a number of stocks would see their prices fall. They did so by buying what are called puts. If you bet right, the rewards can be huge. The risks are also huge, unless, of course, you know something bad is going to happen to the company you're betting against.
This could very well be insider trading at the worst, most horrific, most evil use you've ever seen in your entire life.
One example, United Airlines. The Thursday before the attack, more than 2,000 contracts betting that the stock would go down were purchased. 90 times more in one day than in 3 weeks. When the markets reopened, United stock dropped. The price of the contracts soared, and someone may have made a lot of money fast.
$180,000 turns into $2.4 million when that plane hits the World Trade Center.
It's almost the same story with American Airlines.
That's a 5-fold increase in the value of what was a $337,000 trade on Monday.
All of a sudden becomes what?
$1.8 million.
And there's much more, including an extraordinarily high number of bets against Morgan Stanley and Marsh & McLennan, two of the World Trade Center's biggest tenants. Could this be a coincidence?
This would be one of the most extraordinary coincidences in the history of mankind if it was a coincidence.
A partial answer comes from reports that emerged in late 2001 that a German firm, Convar, had been hired to reconstruct financial data from the hard disks recovered at Ground Zero. The firm talks about this work in its promotional videos.
September the 11th, 2001. The whole world is in shock following the attacks on the World Trade Center. Convar has some solutions to offer. Data stored on countless hard drives retrieved from the collapsed towers was believed to have been lost, but Convar specialists can render irreplaceable information readable again at Europe's only high-security data recovery center. Burnt, crushed, or dirty storage media are ready to relinquish their secrets by the time we finish with them.
More details about the work comes from an IDG news service story posted to CNN.com in December 2001. Under the headline, "Computer disk drives from WTC could yield clues," the article notes, "An unexplained surge in transactions was recorded prior to the attacks, leading to speculation that someone might have profited from previous knowledge of the terrorist plot by moving sums of money. But because the facilities of many financial companies processing the transactions were housed in New York's World Trade Center, destroyed in the blasts, it has, until now, been impossible to verify that suspicion." A Reuters article from the same time, later posted to Convar's website, offers revealing glimpses into the investigation's early results. It quotes Peter Herschel, Convar's director at the time. The suspicion is that inside information about the attacks was used to send financial transaction commands and authorizations in the belief that amid all the chaos the criminals would have, at the very least, a good head start. Of course, it is also possible that there were perfectly legitimate reasons for the unusual rise in business volume. It could turn out that Americans went on an absolute shopping binge on that Tuesday morning. But at this point, there are many transactions that cannot be accounted for. Not only the volume, but the size of the transactions was far higher than usual for a day like that. There is a suspicion that these were possibly planned to take advantage of the chaos. It also quotes Richard Wagner, one of the company's data retrieval experts. There is a suspicion that some people had advanced knowledge of the approximate time of the plane crashes in order to move out amounts exceeding $100 million. They thought that the records of their transactions could not be traced after the mainframes were destroyed.
The Pentagon's financial accounting offices in that same wing were also an obvious target, as were the passengers on board Flight 77. many of whom coincidentally held top-secret clearances and were connected with Pentagon black operations. Agents of the Office of Naval Intelligence had also been investigating financial transactions which were linked to securities being managed by those securities dealers in the World Trade Center that were also targeted. 31% of the 125 fatalities in the Pentagon were from the Naval Command Center that housed the Office of Naval Intelligence. 41% of the fatalities in the Twin Towers came from two companies that managed U.S. government securities, Cantor Fitzgerald and Eurobrokers. There were three major security brokers in the World Trade Center: Cantor Fitzgerald, Eurobrokers, and Garbin Intercapital. At 8:46 on the morning of September 11th, Flight 11 flew directly into Marshall McLennan's secure computer room in the North Tower, right below the floor on which Cantor Fitzgerald was situated. Cantor Fitzgerald was the largest security dealer in the U.S. Shortly thereafter, at 9:03, Flight 175 hit the South Tower right below the floors on which Eurobrokers was situated. In all three cases, the explosive, fiery destruction consumed the offices and the several floors above, destroying files and trapping victims inside. The towers needed to be demolished to create a big enough mess that the illicit activities taking place behind the scenes that morning could be hidden in the confusion of that day.
In the days after the September attacks, there were countless rumors about strange coincidences surrounding the events. One report about a group of Middle Eastern men spotted the morning of September 11th parked just across the river from New York City has not gone away. Investigation of their presence has led to questions about whether Israel was conducting espionage on U.S. soil. We're joined now by ABC's John Miller with an exclusive report this evening.
That's right, Elizabeth. This is a case that took the FBI and the CIA more than 2 months to sort out, while 5 Israelis waited in jail.
It began when this woman was watching the Twin Towers burning from her apartment in New Jersey. She noticed 3 men on top of a van, posing for pictures with the towers burning in the background.
And I could see that they were like happy. You know, they didn't look shocked to me. You know, they didn't look shocked. I thought it was very strange.
The witness called police, who stopped the van hours later and arrested 5 men. All 5, it turns out, were Israeli. They were turned over to the FBI. Sources tell ABC News during a check of national security databases, some of the men were listed as having had connections with Israeli intelligence. At the FBI, that set off alarm bells.
The FBI needed the answers to 3 important questions. Who were these men? What brought them to that parking lot on the morning of September 11th? And did they have any advance knowledge of what was going to happen that day?
The men said they were just taking pictures at the time. They said they worked for a company called Urban Moving. The FBI obtained a search warrant for the company's offices.
2 SUVs were filled up with between 9 and 12 boxes and computers.
Not long after the arrests, the offices of Urban Moving were simply abandoned. Almost everything was left behind. In jail, the 5 Israelis were repeatedly interrogated and given lie detector tests. Stephen Gordon was their American lawyer.
They were asked questions if they had ever been approached by or hired by any non-United States intelligence community.
While there is still some debate among American intelligence officials, many investigators believe some of the men were part of an Israeli operation aimed at monitoring radical Islamic charities that support groups like Hamas, something lawyers for the 5 men and the Israeli government strongly deny.
These 5 Israelis were not involved in any intelligence operation in the United States. The story is simply false.
In the end, the FBI concluded there was no evidence that any of the 5 men had advance knowledge of the September 11th plot. After 71 days, the 5 Israelis were deported, leaving some ruffled feathers among both U.S. and Israeli officials.
Let us never tolerate outrageous conspiracy theories concerning the attacks of September the 11th.
Nobody expected September 11th.
I don't think anybody could have predicted
that these people would take an airplane and slam it into the World Trade Center, take another one and slam it into the Pentagon.
President Bush has said again and again that no one could have imagined what Osama bin Laden ordered for September 11th.
We knew he hated us. But there was nobody in our government, at least, and I don't think the prior government, that could envision flying airplanes into buildings on such a massive scale.
But that turns out not to be true. U.S. military planners did envision and practice those very scenarios. As reported by USA Today, the North American Aerospace Defense Command, NORAD, conducted exercises with fighter jets, simulating hijacked planes flown into the World Trade Center in the 2 years before the attacks. Pentagon planners also envisioned the attack on the Pentagon 5 months before it happened. According to this April 2001 Pentagon email, Air Force officials wanted a war game, having a terrorist group hijack a commercial airline and fly it into the Pentagon. The email was obtained by the nonprofit group Project for Government Oversight. The idea was to check response times to launch fighter jets. But according to the Pentagon email, the plan was ultimately rejected by senior Pentagon officials as too unrealistic.
September 11th was day 2 of Vigilant Guardian, an exercise staged by the Joint Chiefs of Staff and NORAD, which simulated hijacked planes in the northeastern United States. It did so by placing inputs onto the screens of military controllers at the Northeast Air Defense Sector in Rome, New York, known as NEADS. As the attacks unfolded, controllers at NEADS thought that what they were watching was all part of an exercise. What are the chances that a massive hijacking war game begins on the morning of September 11th that cripples the very defense sector in which the attacks take place? Better yet, who made the decision to schedule it on that date? Vigilant Guardian was a branch of Global Guardian, an Armageddon exercise being conducted at Offutt Air Force Base in cooperation with NORAD. Barksdale Air Force Base in Louisiana also participated in Global Guardian. Another war game, Northern Vigilance, moved fighter jets from unknown locations to bases in Canada and Alaska to monitor a fleet of Russian MiGs. 3 F-16s from Andrews Air Force Base, located just 15 miles from the Pentagon, were flown 180 nautical miles away for a training mission in North Carolina, leaving them unable to defend the nation's capital. Langley Air Force Base, which is 130 miles from the Pentagon, would not launch fighter jets until 9:24 a.m., a half hour after the North Tower is struck and 10 minutes before the Pentagon. Although Major Kevin Nisipany at NEADS ordered them to fly towards the capital, they are instead sent out to the Atlantic Ocean. To top it all off, the National Reconnaissance Office in Virginia, which monitors and controls the nation's satellites, began a drill at 8:45, conducted by a team from the CIA, in which a plane crashes into their headquarters. There are a number of other war games that have yet to be fully disclosed. So, let's review. On the morning of 9/11, the United States military is conducting war games in which fighter jets are flown out of the country, planes are crashed into buildings, and hijacked planes go in and out of radar, leaving military controllers confused regarding whether the events were real or an exercise. What a coincidence.
This was a failure of policy, management, capability, and above all, a failure of imagination.
Look! It's the towers! They're falling!
small demonstration of our sinister strength should convince the world of our supreme power.
The Legion of Doom is about to begin its reign of terror.
Or remove the World Trade Center from the New York City skyline.
We're going to have one whale of a main event right here after this commercial message.
It's the love, man, that's going to supercharge the mega powers and tear down the Twin Towers. And Hulk Hogan, that pain won't stop until the Twin Towers come crumbling down.
The taking of the towers. Detectives, Carmen's gang of criminal creepsters has struck again. This time, they've put the bite on the Big Apple, New York City. Each year, thousands of tourists visit the observatory of the World Trade Center's 110-story Twin Towers. But now, a dual disaster has befallen this landmark. This morning, as the first rays of dawn danced across the glass domes of the sleeping metropolis, double trouble crept into New York Harbor, unhitched the towers, and fled to points unknown.
Unidentified warplane sighted heading for New York City.
Our detection system shows nothing. Mayday! Mayday! New York is under attack! Intercept and destroy!
A force field is shielding the warplane. It's getting through.
It is time. We will now strike at the heart of American defense and destroy the Pentagon with one swift and deadly blow.
Operation Honeymoon. Fuck me. You're running a fundraiser.
Fundraiser? 1993. World Trade Center bombing, remember? During the trial, one of the bombers claimed the CIA had advanced knowledge. The diplomat who issued the terrorist visa was CIA. It's not unthinkable they paved the way for the bombing, purely to justify a budget increase.
You're telling me that you're gonna fake some terrorist thing just to scare some money out of Congress?
Well, unfortunately, Mr. Hennessy, I have no idea how to fake killing 4,000 people. So we're just gonna have to do it for real. Oh, blame it on the Muslims, naturally. Then I get my funding.
Manhattan.
Slim, remember those Twin Towers?
Yeah, what about them?
I don't think they're gonna be so tall anymore.
Oh, I'd love to see New York. We could all go with the bus company's special super sitter fare.
$9? This one's on me.
Great!
Ooh.
American Airlines, New York's bridge to the world.
As you can see, we've had our eye on you for some time now, Mr. Anderson. It seems that you've been living two lives. In one life, you're Thomas A. Anderson, program writer for a respectable software company. You have a social security number, you pay your taxes, and you help your landlady carry out her garbage. The other life is lived in computers.
towers are falling! Get away from there!
No use pleading. You're dead.
What the heck's that?
Is that what it looks like?
I think it is what it looks like.
What does what look like? Modem protocols. Remote access. Somebody on the ground's flying your plane.
Bogey, sir. Keep your course.
Liars.
Your flight's gonna make an unscheduled stop in exactly 22 minutes.
Corner of Liberty and Washington. Lower Manhattan.
World Trade Center. I'm going to crash the plane into the World Trade Center.
I'll tell the flight crew.
Got manual override.
Criminals, as we know, are those who choose personal gain over the rights of others and have no regard for the law. But here's where you need to expand your thinking. Criminals can also succeed in business and politics and can be elected as our leaders. If a criminal became the president, imagine what they could achieve. They could use the full weight of their executive power to commit much larger crimes. What you must learn is that it was the criminals all along. Yes, they got power. More power than a criminal should ever have. They rose to the top of media companies that control our news and entertainment. They ascended to the top of the banking system, also to the Oval Office, to Brussels, to the Vatican, to the Crown. They crept in quietly. First, they accumulated the world's wealth. They invented a system of money called central banking, which lends money to governments with interest, placing countries into eternal debt. People's wealth got less. Their wealth got more. Much more. When a criminal is already as rich as they can get, then protecting their ill-gotten gains becomes the priority. So they use their control of the media to set black against white, woman against man, young against old, Muslim against Christian. They convinced us we were the problem so that we would fight and destroy ourselves. These criminals are also known as the Deep State, or Cabal, because of how they control things behind the scenes. Every president after Reagan was one of these Deep State criminals, and their empire got even stronger. With each bad president came new depths America and the world would sink. The world collapsed into darkness.
There's two different questions we're really asking here. There's a difference between asking who did it and who planned it. Who did it? It was elements within the intelligence apparatus and military, key sectors of it. It's called black operations. It's called black squadrons.
And you know all about black ops.
They have fund. It's on record. They have these groups that they fund hundreds of billions of dollars into a secret black budget. That's number one.
But why?
A separate question is who planned the attack.
But why?
David Rockefeller is the individual on record for donating the land for the World Trade Center. This is the same individual who states in his own memoirs that all we need is one major catastrophe and everybody will accept the New World Order. 9/11 was that major catastrophe, and I don't think you'd have the permission to blow up buildings like that without the owner, the guy who commissioned the land to be built in the first place.
Who said pull it?
Think about it. David Rockefeller has admitted he's part of a secret cabal. That's a quote from page 300 of his book.
So
he's part of a secret cabal. No, that's what I'm saying. They planned it.
So how did they get? So how did they get the guys? How did they get the planes? They just, you mean it was all planned? They flew the planes in at exactly that moment, and the bombs were already planted, and everything was set up to happen. So you see, so the big secret conspiracy is they blew up their own building. They blew up their building. They blew up both buildings. For what?
To show how they have the power. They don't mind even sacrificing.
To show that they have power.
They don't mind sacrificing their own.
One of the surprising things, you could call it almost a sad poetic justice,
is that the only buildings that were completely destroyed by this collapse were the buildings that carried the Trade Center label, buildings 1 through 7. No other buildings, with the exception of the small Orthodox church there that dissolved, were destroyed. And every building that carried the label died.
This is nearly a 10-acre site. They didn't destroy the two towers, they destroyed the two towers, a number of buildings, a lot of open space. A train station, a big piece of the city. There's no one thing that's going to go back there.
I was in my office at 30 Rockefeller Plaza, and my personal office, which is on the 56th floor, looked south. I actually was there and saw the building collapse. It was hard to believe that what I saw was actually happening.
I know you're out there. I can feel you now. I know that you're afraid. You're afraid of us. You're afraid of change. I don't know the future. I didn't come here to tell you how this is going to end. I came here to tell you how it's going to begin. I'm going to hang up this phone, and then I'm going to show these people what you don't want them to see. I'm going to show them a world without you. A world without rules and controls, without borders or boundaries. A world where anything is possible. Where we go from there is a choice I leave to you.
What you reap is what you sow!